Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight in Portland, Oregon. It was the kind of persistent November drizzle that seeped into your bones and made everything feel heavier than it should be. Agent Amos Whitfield sat in his government-issued sedan, watching the water streak down the windshield as he waited outside the federal building on Southwest 3rd Avenue. He'd been with the FBI for 22 years. But this was his first assignment to the Witness Security Program, commonly known as WITSEC. At 57, with gray threading through what remained of his dark hair and deep lines etched around his eyes from too many sleepless nights, Amos had thought he'd seen everything the Bureau had to offer. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The call had come in at 4:30 that morning. His supervisor's voice had been tight with an urgency that immediately set Amos on edge. They needed an experienced agent, someone who could handle delicate situations without asking too many questions, someone who could keep their mouth shut. The witness, he was told, was extremely high value. So high value, in fact, that the usual WITSEC protocols had been modified. This wasn't going through the U.S. Marshals Service like it normally would. This was being handled entirely in-house by the FBI, which should have been Amos's first warning sign that something was different about this case. The passenger door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold, damp air. Deputy Director Verity Blackwood slid into the seat beside him, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from the rain. At 43, Verity was considered young for her position, but she'd earned it through a combination of brilliant investigative work and an uncanny ability to navigate the Bureau's political landscape. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her green eyes held a sharpness that could cut through any lie or half-truth. Amos had worked with her twice before, both times on cases that had never made it into any official report. "Agent Whitfield," she said by way of greeting, not bothering with pleasantries. "I assume you've been briefed on the basics. High-value witness, immediate protection needed, unusual circumstances," Amos recited. "That's about all I was told." Verity nodded, pulling a tablet from her briefcase. "The witness's name is Ichabod Grimm, 68 years old. He's been in federal custody for the past 72 hours, and we need to move him to a safe house immediately." "What's his connection to—" "That's need to know, and right now you don't need to know," Verity interrupted. "Your job is simple. Keep him safe, keep him comfortable, and keep him talking. We need his full cooperation for the next 2 weeks while we verify some information he's provided." Amos frowned. In his experience, witnesses were usually eager to share their stories, especially when their lives depended on it. "Is he being difficult?" "On the contrary," Verity said, and something flickered across her face that Amos couldn't quite identify. "He's been extremely cooperative. Almost eager, you might say, but there are complications." "What kind of complications?" Verity was quiet for a moment, staring out at the rain-soaked street. "Mr. Grimm has some unusual requirements. He needs to be kept in complete isolation. No contact with anyone except you and me. No phone calls, no internet, no newspapers. Nothing that connects him to the outside world." "That's not unusual for witness protection," Amos pointed out. "No," Verity agreed. "But his other requirements are, he needs a room with no windows. He needs the temperature kept at exactly 62 degrees, and under no circumstances is he to be photographed or recorded in any way. Amos raised an eyebrow. Sounds like he's paranoid. Perhaps, Verity said. Or perhaps he has good reason to be. Either way, we accommodate his requests. The information he's providing could break open one of the biggest cases we've had in decades. What kind of case are we talking about? Verity turned to look at him directly, and Amos saw something in her eyes that made his stomach tighten. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was close. The kind that goes back a very long time, Agent Whitfield. The kind that involves people who've been presumed dead for years. Before Amos could ask what she meant, Verity opened the car door. Follow me. It's time you met Mr. Grimm. They entered the federal building through a side entrance that Amos had never noticed before, despite having been to this building dozens of times over the years. Verity led him down a series of corridors that seemed to exist in the spaces between the building's official layout, utility hallways and maintenance passages that created a hidden network within the structure. Finally, they arrived at an unmarked door where 2 agents stood guard. They nodded at Verity and stepped aside. The room beyond was small and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in an unwelcoming glare. It looked like an interrogation room, with gray concrete walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. But instead of the usual two-way mirror, there was just more concrete. And sitting at the table, his hands folded neatly in front of him, was Ichabod Grimm. Amos's first thought was that Grimm looked like someone's grandfather. He was thin to the point of being gaunt, with deeply sunken cheeks and pale skin that seemed almost translucent under the harsh lighting. His hair was completely white and combed back from a high forehead marked with liver spots. But it was his eyes that caught Amos's attention. They were a pale, watery blue, but there was something unsettling about the way they moved, tracking every small detail in the room with an intensity that didn't match his frail appearance. Mr. Grimm, Verity said, this is Agent Whitfield. He'll be responsible for your security from this point forward. Grimm's thin lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than Amos had expected, with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. Agent Whitfield. Yes, you'll do nicely. You have an honest face. I can work with an honest face. Mr. Grimm, Amos said, taking a seat across from him. I understand you have some information for us. Information, Grimm repeated, seeming to taste the word. Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it, though confession might be more accurate. Verity leaned forward slightly. You've already given us your initial statement, Mr. Grimm. What Agent Whitfield needs to know is... What Agent Whitfield needs to know, Grimm interrupted, his eyes never leaving Amos's face, is that I've been running for a very long time. 43 years to be exact, and I'm tired of running. Who are you running from? Amos asked. Grimm's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too perfect, too white to be natural. From people who don't officially exist, Agent Whitfield. From an organization that was supposed to have been dismantled before you were even born. But they're still out there, still operating, and they've been looking for me all this time. Why? Because I know where the bodies are buried, Grimm said simply. Literally and figuratively. I know names, dates, locations. I know about operations that were never recorded, victims who were never reported missing, and crimes that were never investigated. Amos glanced at Verity, who nodded slightly. This was why they needed Grimm. He was offering to expose something big, something that had been hidden for decades. And you're willing to testify to all of this? Amos asked. Testify? Grimm laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Oh, Agent Whitfield, you misunderstand. There won't be any trial. The people I'm talking about don't get arrested. They don't go to court. They simply disappear, just like they've made so many others disappear over the years. Then what do you want? Protection, Grimm said. Real protection, not just some safe house in the suburbs. I need to disappear completely, become someone else entirely. In exchange, I'll give you everything. Names of people in your own government who've been compromised. Locations of mass graves that were never discovered. Details of operations that violated every law, both human and divine. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Amos could feel the weight of what Grimm was offering, the magnitude of the conspiracy he was claiming to expose. But there was something else, something in the way Grimm looked at him that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Mr. Grimm," Verity said, breaking the silence, "we're prepared to move you to a secure location tonight. Agent Whitfield will accompany you and remain with you for the duration of your debriefing." "Excellent," Grimm said, finally looking away from Amos. "But remember my requirements. No windows, 62 degrees, and absolutely no recordings of any kind." "That's all been arranged," Verity assured him. As they prepared to leave, Amos noticed something odd. When Grimm stood up, he moved with a fluidity that didn't match his apparent age. It was subtle, just a moment where his movement seemed too smooth, too controlled for someone who looked so frail. And when he reached for his coat, Amos caught a glimpse of his wrist where the sleeve pulled back. The skin there was marked with what looked like old scars, but they formed a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, like some kind of symbol or design. The safe house was located 40 miles outside of Portland, deep in the Columbia River Gorge. It was a modest, two-story structure that looked like any other rural home from the outside. But Amos knew it was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems, reinforced walls, and multiple escape routes. As requested, the room prepared for Grimm was in the basement. No windows, climate-controlled, and completely isolated from any electronic surveillance. As they settled in for what would be a long 2 weeks, Amos couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the whole situation. Grimm was too calm for someone whose life was supposedly in danger. He seemed almost pleased to be in custody, as if this had been his plan all along. That first night, Amos sat in the living room, reviewing the limited information Verity had provided about Grimm. According to the file, Ichabod Grimm had no official existence before 1980. No birth certificate, no social security number, no record of education or employment. He'd simply appeared one day in Seattle, working as a janitor at a medical research facility. He'd lived a quiet, unremarkable life for 40 years, until 3 days ago when he'd walked into the FBI field office in Portland and announced that he had information about a series of murders that had taken place in the 1970s. But the murders he described hadn't matched any known cases. The victims he named had no missing persons reports filed for them. The locations he mentioned showed no evidence of the crimes he claimed had occurred there. By all official records, nothing Grimm was saying had ever happened. Yet Verity had believed him enough to implement these extreme security measures, which meant either Grimm was telling the truth about a massive cover-up, or something else was going on that Amos wasn't being told about. Around midnight, Amos heard footsteps from the basement. Grimm was supposed to be sleeping, but the footsteps continued, pacing back and forth in a regular pattern. Amos made his way down the stairs, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. He found Grimm standing in the center of the room, fully dressed, muttering to himself. As Amos got closer, he could make out some of the words. 43 years, 7 months, 16 days, they're getting closer. Always getting closer. But not close enough, never close enough. "Mr. Grimm?" Amos said softly. "Is everything all right?" Grim turned to look at him, and for just a moment his eyes seemed to reflect the light like an animal's. "Agent Whitfield, do you believe in evil? Real evil, not just the criminal acts you investigate, but something deeper, older?" "I believe people can do evil things," Amos said carefully. "That's not what I asked," Grim said, moving closer. "I asked if you believe in evil as a force, as something that exists independent of human action." "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Mr. Grim." Grim smiled that unsettling smile again. "You will, Agent Whitfield. Before this is over, you'll understand exactly what I mean. You see, the organization I'm exposing, they didn't just commit crimes. They tried to harness something they didn't understand, something that should have been left alone." "What kind of something?" "The kind that changes people," Grim said. "The kind that makes them into things that aren't quite human anymore. Things like me." Before Amos could respond, Grim turned and walked back to his bed, lying down fully clothed on top of the covers. "Good night, Agent Whitfield. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow I'll start telling you the real story, and once you hear it, you'll wish you hadn't." Amos stood there for a long moment, watching the old man lie perfectly still on the bed, not even seeming to breathe. Then he turned and headed back upstairs, his mind racing with questions. What had Grim meant by "things like me"? What kind of organization were they dealing with? And why did he have the growing feeling that he was not protecting Grim from danger, but rather protecting everyone else from whatever Grim really was? As he settled back into his chair in the living room, Amos pulled out his phone to call Verity, then remembered the strict no-communication protocol. He was alone with Grim for the next 2 weeks, cut off from any backup or support. And for the first time in his long career with the FBI, Agent Amos Whitfield felt genuinely afraid of the person he was supposed to be protecting. The rain continued to fall outside, drumming against the windows with an irregular rhythm that sounded almost like fingers tapping, as if something out there in the darkness was trying to find a way in. Or, perhaps, Amos thought with a chill, trying to make sure nothing got out. The second day began with fog so thick that Amos couldn't see more than 10 feet beyond the safe house windows. It wrapped around the building like a living thing, muffling sounds and creating an oppressive sense of isolation. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night going over Grim's file and trying to make sense of the old man's cryptic warnings. When he finally dozed off around 4 in the morning, his dreams were filled with shadowy figures and rooms that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. He found Grim already awake in the basement, sitting at the small table that had been provided for him, writing in a notebook with careful, precise movements. The old man looked up as Amos descended the stairs, and again there was that unsettling quality to his gaze, as if he could see things that others couldn't. "Good morning, Agent Whitfield," Grim said, closing the notebook. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Amos lied. "Are you ready to begin your debriefing?" "Eager, in fact," Grim replied. "But first, I need to know something. Has Deputy Director Blackwood told you anything about the prototype program?" Amos shook his head. The name meant nothing to him. "I thought not," Grim said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "She's keeping you in the dark, just as she's been kept in the dark by those above her. It's how they've operated for decades. Compartmentalization taken to its extreme. No one person knows the whole truth. Except you, except me," Grim confirmed. "You see, Agent Whitfield, I wasn't just a witness to these crimes. I was a participant. For 13 years, from 1964 to 1977, I was part of a program that officially never existed. We were based out of a facility in northern Montana, so far off the grid that it didn't appear on any government documentation. Our funding came through channels so convoluted that even we didn't know who was ultimately paying for our work. Amos pulled out his recording device, then remembered Grimm's prohibition against recordings. Instead, he grabbed a notebook and pen. What was the purpose of this program? Enhancement, Grimm said simply. Human enhancement. The government was convinced that the Soviets were developing super soldiers, individuals with capabilities beyond normal human limitations. We were tasked with ensuring America didn't fall behind in this particular arms race. You're talking about genetic modification? Among other things, Grimm said. Genetic modification, chemical enhancement, psychological conditioning, surgical alterations. We tried everything. Most of the test subjects died within weeks. The few who survived changed. Changed how? Grimm stood up and began pacing, his movements still displaying that unnatural fluidity. The changes varied, depending on the specific experiments. Some developed enhanced strength or speed. Others gained heightened senses or improved healing capabilities. But there were always side effects. Always costs that we didn't anticipate. What kind of costs? Madness, for one, Grimm said. The human mind isn't designed to process certain types of sensory input. Imagine being able to hear every conversation within a mile radius, all at once, all the time. Or being able to see into spectrums of light that reveal things that are meant to remain hidden. Many of the subjects went insane within months. And the ones who didn't? Grimm stopped pacing and looked directly at Amos. They became something else. Not quite human anymore, but not quite inhuman either. Caught between two states of being, unable to return to what they were, but unable to fully become what they were meant to be. You're talking about yourself, Amos said. It wasn't a question. Very perceptive, Agent Whitfield, Grimm said with that unsettling smile. Yes, I was one of the test subjects. Volunteer number 37. I was dying of pancreatic cancer, given 6 months to live. The program offered me a chance at survival, though they weren't entirely honest about what that survival would entail. What did they do to you? A combination of treatments, Grimm said. Genetic therapy using viral vectors, chemical compounds derived from sources I still don't fully understand, surgical implantation of organic material that wasn't quite human in origin. The process took 3 months and was the most excruciating experience imaginable. But when it was over, the cancer was gone, along with many other things I'd taken for granted, such as the ability to eat normal food, for one. My digestive system was completely altered. I require a very specific diet now, one that would disgust most people. The ability to be in direct sunlight for more than a few minutes without experiencing severe burns. The ability to sleep properly. I don't truly sleep anymore, just enter a state of reduced activity that isn't quite rest. Amos was writing furiously, trying to keep up with Grimm's revelations. How many others survived these experiments? By 1977, when the program was supposedly terminated, there were 12 of us still alive. We were told we'd be relocated, given new identities, and monitored for the rest of our lives. Instead, they tried to eliminate us. Why? Because we were evidence of crimes against humanity, Grimm said. The experiments violated every ethical standard, every international treaty. If word got out about what had been done, the scandal would have destroyed careers, toppled administrations, maybe even triggered international sanctions. It was cleaner to simply make us disappear. But you escaped. Some of us did, Grimm said, 7 of the 12. We scattered, went into hiding, tried to build new lives for ourselves. But they never stopped hunting us. One by one, my fellow survivors were found and eliminated. As far as I know, I'm the last one left. And now you're turning yourself in. Why? Grimm sat back down, his pale eyes fixed on Amos. Because I'm dying, Agent Whitfield. The treatments that saved my life also gave me an expiration date. My body is breaking down at the cellular level. The doctors I've secretly consulted give me perhaps 6 months, maybe less. I want the truth to be known before I'm gone. What truth, specifically? That the program never really ended, Grimm said. Oh, officially it was shut down in 1977. All records destroyed, all personnel reassigned or retired. But the research continued in different forms, under different names. And more importantly, some of the original test subjects didn't just survive, they thrived. They integrated into society, into positions of power, and they've been pulling strings from the shadows ever since. Amos felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying there are enhanced individuals in positions of authority within our government? I'm saying, Grimm said slowly, that some of the people making decisions at the highest levels of power are no longer entirely human. They have agendas that align with their altered nature, rather than the interests of normal humans. And they will do anything to keep their secret. Do you have proof of this? I have names, Grimm said. Dates. Locations where evidence is hidden. But more importantly, I have myself. My blood, my tissue samples, my DNA, they all contain evidence of the modifications. Any competent geneticist would be able to identify the anomalies. We'll need to arrange for medical examinations, Amos said. No, Grimm said sharply. No examinations, no blood tests, not yet. Not until I have guarantees of protection. The FBI is protecting you. The FBI is compromised, Grimm said. Why do you think I insisted on such specific conditions? No windows, because they can see through walls, but not through earth and concrete. 62 degrees, because thermal imaging is less effective at that temperature. No recordings, because they have technology that can extract information from electronic devices remotely. They? Who are they exactly? The surviving test subjects who've gone rogue. The handlers who still believe in the program. The officials who've been compromised or converted. It's not a single organization anymore, it's a network, a web of individuals with shared interests and inhuman capabilities. Amos set down his pen, his hand cramping from writing. Mr. Grimm, what you're describing sounds like paranoid delusion, Grimm interrupted, like the ravings of a madman. Yes, I'm aware of how it sounds. That's why they've been so successful at hiding. Anyone who tries to expose them sounds insane. It's the perfect cover. Then, how do you expect anyone to believe you? I don't expect belief, Grimm said. I expect investigation. I can provide you with the location of the original facility in Montana. It was supposedly destroyed, but the underground levels remain intact. The evidence is still there. The laboratories, the holding cells, the remains of the test subjects who didn't survive. If this place exists, why hasn't anyone found it? Because it's protected, Grimm said. Not by guards or fences, but by something else. Something that was released during the final days of the program, when they tried to destroy all evidence. It's still there, still active, still defending the facility from intrusion. What kind of something? Grimm was quiet for a long moment. That's where my story becomes even harder to believe, Agent Whitfield. You see, not all of the test subjects were volunteers like myself. Some were acquired. Individuals who already possessed certain unusual characteristics. The program didn't just create enhanced humans. It also studied things that weren't human to begin with. I don't understand. There are things in this world that exist outside our normal understanding, Grimm said. Ancient things. Rare things. Things that most people would call monsters if they knew they existed. The program captured some of these beings and tried to extract their essence, to understand what made them different, to replicate their abilities in human subjects. Amos stared at the old man, trying to process what he was hearing. You're talking about cryptids? Mythological creatures? I'm talking about biological entities that don't fit into our standard taxonomic classifications, Grimm said carefully. Beings that have existed alongside humanity for millennia, hiding in the spaces we don't look, surviving in ways we don't understand. The program found them, studied them, and in some cases harvested them. Harvested them? Where do you think the organic material they implanted in me came from? Grimm asked. It wasn't synthesized in a laboratory. It was extracted from living beings, beings that were kept in the lower levels of the facility, dissected while still alive, their tissues and organs used to modify human test subjects. This is... Amos trailed off, unable to find the right words. Horrifying? Impossible? Yes, it's both of those things. But it's also true, and it's why the facility can never be fully destroyed. Some of those beings are still down there, changed by decades of captivity and experimentation, driven mad by what was done to them. They've become the facility's guardians, attacking anyone who tries to enter. A sound from upstairs made both men freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the floor above them. Amos immediately reached for his weapon, but Grimm held up a hand. Don't, he whispered. If it's who I think it is, a gun won't help. Who do you think it is? Someone who's been tracking me for a very long time, Grimm said. Someone who was in the program with me. Test subject number 15. We called him Josiah Creed, though that wasn't his real name. None of us used our real names. The footsteps stopped directly above them. Then, impossibly, they heard a voice, speaking as clearly as if the person was in the room with them despite being a floor above. Hello, Ichabod, the voice said. It was deep and resonant, with an odd quality that made Amos's teeth ache. It's been a long time. Hello, Josiah, Grimm replied, his voice steady despite the fear Amos could see in his eyes. I wondered when you'd find me. You shouldn't have come in from the cold, the voice said. You know what happens to those who break the silence. The silence needs to be broken, Grimm said. We've hidden in the shadows long enough. The shadows are where we belong, the voice replied. It's where things like us have always belonged. You're putting all of us at risk with this foolishness. Things like us shouldn't exist, Grimm said. What was done to us was wrong. The people need to know the truth. There was a long pause. Then the voice spoke again, colder now. You have 48 hours, Ichabod. 48 hours to disappear again, to return to the silence. If you don't, if you continue with this betrayal, then what happens next is on your head. The footsteps resumed, moving toward the stairs. Amos raised his weapon, ready to confront the intruder, but Grimm grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Don't, he said urgently. You're not equipped to deal with what Josiah has become. Let him leave. I can't just let an intruder walk away. You can, and you will, Grimm said, his grip tightening. Trust me, Agent Whitfield, this is not a fight you can win with conventional weapons. Against his better judgment, Amos remained in the basement, listening as the footsteps ascended the stairs and moved through the house. A door opened and closed, and then there was silence. When Amos finally went upstairs to investigate, he found no sign of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. The security system showed no breaches. The cameras revealed nothing unusual. But on the kitchen table, there was something that hadn't been there before. A photograph, old and yellowed with age. It showed a group of people in medical gowns, standing in what looked like a clinical setting. Amos counted 12 individuals, and even in the poor quality of the old photo, he could see that something was wrong with all of them. Their proportions were slightly off, their postures unnatural, their eyes reflecting the camera flash in ways that human eyes shouldn't. Grimm appeared beside him, looking down at the photo. That was taken in 1976, about a year before the program ended. I'm third from the left. Amos looked at the figure Grimm indicated. It was recognizably him, but younger, healthier looking, and yet somehow more disturbing. There was something predatory about his stance, something inhuman about his expression. "Who are the others?" Amos asked. "The other survivors at that point," Grimm said. "Most of them are dead now. But Josiah, he's there, on the far right. And there, in the center, that's Dr. Erasmus Hollowell, the program's director. He supposedly died in a plane crash in 1978, but I've always had my doubts. Why? Because men like Hollowell don't just walk away from their life's work," Grimm said. "He believed in what we were doing, believed we were creating the next step in human evolution. If he's still alive, still out there somewhere, then the program never really ended. It just went deeper underground." Amos picked up the photograph, studying the faces. "We need to report this. The intrusion, the threat, no," Grimm said firmly. "If you report this, if you bring others into it, they'll simply disappear me. Make it look like I escaped or died trying. They have people inside the FBI, people who will ensure this never sees the light of day." "Then, what do you suggest?" "We continue as planned," Grimm said. "I give you all the information I have. You document everything. And when the time comes, when we have enough evidence compiled, we release it all at once to multiple sources, making it impossible to suppress. And Josiah's threat? Josiah won't act immediately," Grimm said. "He's careful, methodical. He'll wait to see if I comply with his ultimatum. That gives us 48 hours to get as much information documented as possible. And after 48 hours?" Grimm's smile was grim. "After that, Agent Whitfield, we'll both likely be dead. Unless we can convince Deputy Director Blackwood to expand our protection. Real protection, not just a safe house and a single agent." "What kind of protection could possibly stop someone who can walk through walls?" "The kind that knows what we're really dealing with," Grimm said. "There are others out there, Agent Whitfield. Not test subjects, but people who've encountered the kinds of things the program was studying. Hunters, investigators, specialists in the impossible. If we're going to survive this, we need their help." Amos looked at the photograph again, at the twisted figures standing in that clinical setting, and made a decision. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out. We have 48 hours to make sure the truth survives, even if we don't." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of revelations. Grimm spoke almost continuously, pausing only for water and the strange gray nutrient paste he consumed instead of normal food. Amos filled notebook after notebook with increasingly disturbing information about the prototype program and its aftermath. Every detail Grimm provided seemed designed to challenge the boundaries of what Amos considered possible. The facility in Montana, Grimm was saying as the sun set on their second full day together, was built on a very specific location. Dr. Hollowell insisted on it. He'd studied maps, geological surveys, indigenous folklore. He believed certain places had properties that would enhance our experiments. Properties? Amos asked, his hand cramping from constant writing. Electromagnetic anomalies, unusual mineral deposits. Historical accounts of strange occurrences, Grimm explained. Hollowell called them thin places, locations where the barrier between our reality and something else was weakened. And you believe this? I've seen the evidence, Grimm said simply. Test subjects exposed to the same procedures had wildly different results depending on where the experiments were conducted. The Montana facility produced the most dramatic transformations, but also the highest casualty rate. Amos set down his pen and rubbed his eyes. They'd been at this for hours, and the lack of sleep was catching up with him. Mr. Grimm, I need to ask you something directly. Are you telling me the complete truth, or is this an elaborate delusion brought on by whatever was done to you? Grimm studied him for a long moment. That's the question, isn't it? How do you trust the word of someone who admits to being fundamentally changed, possibly damaged, by experimental procedures? The answer is, you don't trust my word. You verify. How? Tomorrow morning, call Deputy Director Blackwood. Tell her to check the following. Military records for a Dr. Erasmus Hollowell, stationed at Fort Harrison, Montana, from 1962 to 1977. Classified budget allocations for something called Project Chrysalis. And most importantly, satellite imagery of coordinates 48.7128 degrees north, 112.9019 degrees west. Amos wrote down the information. What will she find? If she has the right clearance levels, she'll find heavily redacted files that reference a research initiative. She'll find budget lines that don't match any known military projects. And at those coordinates, she'll find a geographic anomaly, an area where no satellites can get clear images, where electronic equipment consistently malfunctions, where even wildlife avoids entering. That could be explained by what, Agent Whitfield? Grimm interrupted. By natural phenomena that somehow only affects that specific 100-acre area? By technical glitches that have persisted for over 40 years? Or by something that was released when they tried to destroy the evidence of what they'd done? Before Amos could respond, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. Not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had opened a door to a freezer. His breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the windows. Grimm stood up slowly, his pale eyes scanning the room. They're here. Who's here? Not who. What Grimm moved to the center of the room, away from the walls. Something Hollowell created in the final days of the program. He called them Seekers. Biological tracking systems designed to hunt down escaped test subjects. Biological tracking systems. Think of them as living surveillance devices, Grimm said, his voice tight with fear. Partially organic, partially something else. They can track the unique biological signatures created by the enhancement process. I thought I'd lost them years ago, but if they're here now... The lights flickered and died. In the darkness, Amos heard something that made his skin crawl. A wet, sliding sound, like something viscous moving across the walls. He reached for his flashlight, but Grimm's hand grabbed his wrist. "No light," he whispered. "They're drawn to electrical fields." "Stay perfectly still." In the darkness, Amos became aware of a smell. Ozone mixed with something organic and rotting. The sliding sound grew closer, and he could hear something else now. A rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat but wrong somehow, too fast and irregular. Then, impossibly, he saw them. Not with his eyes exactly, but perceived them nonetheless. Shapes moving through the darkness, translucent and shifting, like living shadows with substance. They flowed across the walls and ceiling, searching, probing, leaving trails of something that glowed faintly with a sickly phosphorescence. One of them passed directly over Amos, and he felt it. A sensation like ice water in his veins, a momentary connection to something vast and alien and hungry. In that instant, he understood what Grimm had been trying to tell him. These things weren't from any normal biological source. They were something else, something that shouldn't exist in any rational world. The Seekers circled Grimm, growing agitated. The pulsing sound increased, becoming almost unbearable. Grimm stood perfectly still, but Amos could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the Seekers withdrew. They flowed back through the walls, leaving only the lingering smell on the phosphorescent trails that were already beginning to fade. The lights flickered back on, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. Grimm collapsed into his chair, looking even paler than usual. "They've marked me," he said quietly. "They'll report back to whoever sent them. We have less time than I thought." Amos found his voice. What the hell were those things? "The product of Hollowell's final experiments," Grimm said. "He was trying to create the perfect tracking system, something that could find anyone, anywhere, regardless of how they tried to hide. He succeeded, but not in the way he intended. The Seekers aren't controlled by anyone. They operate on their own imperatives now, following programming that's evolved beyond its original parameters. How do we stop them?" "We don't," Grimm said. "But there are ways to confuse them, to delay them. I'll need specific materials, salt, iron filings, and something with a high silver content. The combination creates an electromagnetic interference that disrupts their sensory capabilities." "You're telling me salt and silver stop these things? Like some kind of folklore?" "Folklore often has a basis in reality," Grimm said. "Our ancestors encountered things they couldn't explain and developed methods to deal with them through trial and error. Hollowell studied these old protections and found scientific explanations for why some of them worked." Amos's phone rang, startling both men. It was Verity Blackwood. "Agent Whitfield." Her voice was tense. "We have a problem. Satellite surveillance just detected multiple vehicles converging on your location. You need to evacuate immediately." "Understood," Amos said. "We've also had a breach here, some kind of—" "Not over the phone," Verity cut him off. "There's a secondary safe house 20 miles north. GPS coordinates incoming. Move now." The line went dead. Amos looked at Grimm. "We're leaving. Pack only essentials." Grimm nodded, gathering his notebooks and the small bag of personal items he'd brought. "Agent Whitfield, there's something else you need to know. The people coming for us, they won't all be human. Some will be other test subjects like Josiah. They're stronger, faster, and more resilient than normal humans. Standard tactics won't work." "Then what will?" "Fire," Grimm said. "High-intensity fire disrupts the cellular modifications. And electricity. High voltage causes our enhanced nervous systems to temporarily shut down. But getting close enough to use either without being killed first, that's the challenge." They moved quickly through the house, Amos gathering the notebooks and securing them in a bulletproof case. As they reached the garage, they heard vehicles approaching, multiple engines coming fast. "They're not trying to be subtle," Amos observed. "They don't need to be," Grimm said. "This far from civilization, who's going to witness what happens?" They got into Amos's sedan, and he started the engine. As they pulled out of the garage, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway, 3 vehicles blocking the exit. "Hold on," Amos said, throwing the car into reverse. He spun the wheel, executing a J-turn that his defensive driving instructor would have been proud of, and headed for the back of the property. There was a service road there, barely more than a dirt track, but it would get them out. Behind them, the vehicles gave chase. In the rearview mirror, Amos saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the pursuers had gotten out of their vehicle and was running after them on foot. But they were keeping pace with the car, moving with inhuman speed and agility. "That's Josiah," Grimm said, looking back. "He was always the fastest of us." Amos pushed the accelerator to the floor, the sedan bouncing violently over the rough terrain. They burst through a wooden gate onto a paved road, tires squealing as Amos fought to maintain control. The thing that had been Josiah Creed stopped at the edge of the property, watching them escape. Even from a distance, Amos could see him clearly in the darkness, as if he generated his own faint light. He stood perfectly still, and Amos had the unsettling feeling that Josiah was looking directly at him, memorizing his face. "He's letting us go," Amos said. "For now," Grimm replied. "He wants to see where we run to, who we contact. They're not just trying to eliminate me anymore. They want to know how much the FBI knows, who else is involved." They drove in silence for several minutes, following the GPS coordinates Verity had provided. The secondary safe house turned out to be a cabin deep in the woods, even more isolated than the first location. As they pulled up to the cabin, Verity Blackwood emerged from the shadows, flanked by two other agents Amos didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 30s with short black hair and alert eyes. The other was an older man with graying temples and the kind of build that suggested military training. "Agent Whitfield, Mr. Grimm," Verity said. "These are Agents Prudence Fairweather and Cornelius Ashford. They're specialists in unusual cases." "Ma'am," Amos said, "we need to talk about what happened at the safe house." "There were things—" "I know," Verity said. "Mr. Grimm's story checks out. Every detail he provided leads to something real, something that's been deliberately hidden. We're dealing with a conspiracy that goes deeper than any of us imagined." Agent Fairweather stepped forward. "Mr. Grimm, I've been tracking anomalous incidents for the past decade. Events that don't fit normal patterns, that suggest the presence of enhanced individuals. Your testimony connects dots I've been trying to piece together for years." "Then you believe me?" Grimm asked. "I believe the evidence," Fairweather said. "And the evidence suggests that we're facing a threat unlike anything the Bureau has dealt with before." Agent Ashford spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly. "We've identified at least 7 individuals in positions of power who match the profiles of enhanced test subjects. 3 in federal agencies, 2 in major corporations, 2 in the military. If they're coordinating, if they're working toward a common goal." "They are," Grimm said. "The goal was always the same: controlled evolution. Hollowell believed that humanity was stagnant, that we needed to be forcibly evolved to survive future challenges. The test subjects who survived and thrived, they still believe in that vision. They see themselves as the vanguard of a new species." "And everyone else?" Verity asked. "Obsolete," Grimm said simply. "Destined to be replaced or ruled by their betters." A sound in the distance made them all freeze. Helicopters, multiple from the sound of it, approaching fast. "Inside now," Verity commanded. They rushed into the cabin, which, despite its rustic appearance, was equipped with reinforced walls and state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. On the monitors, they could see the helicopters circling, searchlights probing the forest. "Military?" Amos asked. "No markings," Ashford observed. "Black Ops, maybe, or private military contractors. Or something else entirely," Grimm said. He was standing by the window, peering out through a crack in the curtains. "Agent Blackwood, you need to understand something. The enhanced subjects aren't the only threat. Hollowell had contingency plans, fail-safes in case the test subjects ever united against the program. He created things specifically designed to hunt and kill us. Things like the Seekers, worse than Seekers, Grimm said. The Seekers just track and observe. The Hunters, they were designed to eliminate enhanced subjects who went rogue. They're not fully biological, not fully mechanical. They're something in between, something that... The window exploded inward. Something came through, a blur of motion too fast to track clearly. It hit Grimm, sending him flying across the room. Amos caught a glimpse of it as it paused for a microsecond. Humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail, with too many joints in its limbs, skin that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states, and a face that was more suggestion than reality. Agent Fairweather reacted first, pulling a weapon Amos didn't recognize, something that looked like a cross between a taser and a flare gun. She fired, and a bolt of white-hot electricity struck the hunter. It screamed, a sound that was partly organic, partly electronic, and retreated through the window. Grimm was bleeding from multiple lacerations, struggling to stand. "That was just a scout," he gasped. "The real attack is coming." As if his words were a signal, the lights went out. In the darkness, they could hear them. Multiple hunters surrounding the cabin, their inhuman voices creating a harmony that made Amos's teeth ache. "Everyone stay together," Verity commanded. Fairweather, Ashford, defensive positions. Whitfield, protect the witness. But Grimm was already moving, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" Amos demanded. "They're here for me," Grimm said. "If I leave, maybe they'll follow. Give you a chance to escape." "That's not happening," Amos said. "We're getting you out of here." "No," Grimm said. And for the first time, Amos saw something inhuman in his pale eyes, a glimmer of the predator he'd been transformed into. "You don't understand, Agent Whitfield. I didn't come to you just to expose the truth. I came because I needed to pass it on before the end. The notebooks, the evidence, it's all there, everything you need to bring them down." "Grimm." "My real name," the old man said, "was Marcus Enderly. I was a teacher before all this. Elementary school science. I volunteered for the program because I was dying and desperate. But what they made me into... I've spent 40 years trying to atone for what I became, for what I did during those 13 years. This is my last chance to make it right." The door burst open. Not from outside, but from Grimm pushing through it with inhuman strength. He moved into the darkness, and Amos heard the sounds of combat. Impacts, screams, the wet sound of tearing flesh. "Move!" Verity shouted. "Back exit, now!" They fled through the rear of the cabin as the battle raged behind them. Amos looked back once and saw Grimm, or the thing that had been Marcus Enderly, fully transformed. He was taller, elongated, his limbs bent at impossible angles, fighting 3 hunters simultaneously with a savage grace that was terrible to behold. They made it to their vehicles and fled into the night. Behind them, the cabin erupted in flames. Whether from the battle or some self-destruct mechanism, Amos never learned. The fire lit up the sky, and in that light, Amos saw shapes fleeing in all directions, some human, some decidedly not. 3 days after the attack at the cabin, Amos Whitfield sat in a secure FBI facility in Seattle, surrounded by the notebooks he'd filled with Grimm's testimony. The old man, Marcus Enderly, was presumed dead, though no body had been recovered from the burned cabin. The official report would list him as a protected witness killed during an attempted extraction by unknown hostiles. Only a handful of people would ever know the truth. Verity Blackwood sat across from him, reading through the notebooks with an expression that grew more troubled with each page. Agents Fairweather and Ashford were present too, along with 3 other specialists who'd been brought in to assess the threat. According to this, Verity said, there are at least 40 enhanced individuals still active, many in positions of significant influence. That's just the ones Grimm knew about, Fairweather added. If the program continued in other forms, there could be hundreds. The question, Ashford said, is what we do about it. We can't simply arrest them. Most haven't committed any crimes we can prove. And if they're as dangerous as Grimm suggested... They are, Amos said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I saw what Grimm became at the end. I saw what those hunters could do. If there are 40 individuals with similar capabilities, and they feel threatened, it would be a massacre, Verity finished. A knock at the door interrupted them. An agent entered looking shaken. Ma'am, we have a visitor. He says his name is Josiah Creed, and he's requesting to speak with Agent Whitfield. The room erupted in motion, hands moving to weapons, but Verity held up a hand. Where is he? Main lobby. He walked in through the front door, surrendered to security. Ma'am, he's not entirely human. Security doesn't know what to do with him. Amos stood. I'll talk to him. Absolutely not, Verity said. He could have killed me at the safe house, Amos pointed out. He didn't. If he wanted me dead, I don't think this building's security would stop him. Maybe he wants to talk. After a heated debate, it was agreed that Amos would meet with Josiah, but only under heavy security. They set up in an interrogation room that had been specially reinforced, with Fairweather and Ashford stationed outside with the electrical weapons that had proven effective against the hunters. Josiah Creed was not what Amos had expected. He appeared to be in his 60s, well dressed in an expensive suit, with silver hair and an aristocratic bearing. Only his eyes gave away his inhuman nature. They were completely black, like pools of oil, and they reflected light in unsettling ways. Agent Whitfield, Josiah said, his voice carrying that same resonance that made Amos's teeth ache. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Mr. Creed, Amos said, taking a seat across from him. Or is it Josiah? Josiah is sufficient. My original name is irrelevant. The person I was before the program no longer exists. He folded his hands on the table, and Amos noticed that his fingers had too many joints. I understand Marcus is dead. We believe so, yes. He died as himself, Josiah said. That's more than most of us can hope for. The transformations, you see, aren't just physical. Each time we change, we lose a piece of our original selves. Marcus held on longer than most, but in the end, the monster won. Is that what you are? A monster? By any reasonable definition, yes, Josiah said matter-of-factly. I've done things that would horrify you, Agent Whitfield. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. The changes made to us came with needs, dietary, psychological, behavioral. We can fight them for a time, but eventually, nature wins. Why are you here? To make you an offer, Josiah said. The others, the enhanced individuals Marcus told you about, they're divided. Some want to eliminate everyone who knows about the program. Others believe it's time to reveal ourselves, to take our place as humanity's successors. Both factions are dangerous, but for different reasons. And you, I represent a third faction, Josiah said. Those of us who simply want to be left alone. We've built lives, found ways to manage our conditions, learned to coexist with normal humans without causing harm. We don't want exposure, but we also don't want war. What are you proposing? A truce, Josiah said. The FBI stops investigating the program and its survivors. In exchange, we police our own. Any enhanced individual who threatens public safety, who can't control their nature, we deal with them ourselves. You're asking us to ignore a massive conspiracy. I'm offering you a solution to an impossible problem. Josiah interrupted. You've seen what we can do. Imagine 40 of us, cornered and desperate, fighting for survival. How many would die? How many innocent people would be caught in the crossfire? Amos was quiet for a moment, thinking. What about the people in positions of power? The ones influencing policy, making decisions that affect millions. As long as they don't expose themselves or harm innocents, they're left alone, Josiah said. But if they cross those lines, we deal with them. And who decides what crosses the line? A council, Josiah said. Representatives from each faction, including a liaison from the FBI, someone who understands what we are and can help maintain the balance. Someone like me? You've seen both sides now, Josiah said. You've witnessed our capabilities, but you also saw Marcus's humanity. You understand that we're not simply monsters to be eliminated, or weapons to be controlled. We're something in between, trying to find our place in a world that never anticipated our existence. What about Dr. Hollowell? Is he still alive? Josiah's expression darkened. Hollowell is complicated. He's alive, yes, but he's no longer entirely human either. The process he used on himself was different, more extreme. He's become something even we fear. Where is he? Hidden, Josiah said, protected by things that make the hunters look tame. He's continuing his work, creating new generations of enhanced beings, but they're not like us. They're purpose-built, designed for specific functions, living weapons, essentially. And you're not stopping him? We've tried, Josiah admitted. 3 times we've sent teams after him, none returned. Hollowell has become something beyond our ability to confront directly. Then how do we stop him? We don't, Josiah said. We contain him. Keep him isolated, prevent his creations from entering the world. It's all we can do. The door opened, and Verity entered, followed by Fairweather and Ashford. Mr. Creed, she said, I've been listening to your proposal. Josiah didn't seem surprised. Deputy Director Blackwood, I assume you have questions. Many, Verity said. But first, I need guarantees. If we agree to this truce, how do we verify compliance? How do we know enhanced individuals aren't committing crimes we can't detect? You'll have me, Josiah said. I'll serve as intermediary. Any suspected enhanced activity, you contact me. I investigate and, if necessary, intervene. And why should we trust you? Because I have the most to lose, Josiah said. I've spent 40 years building a life, an identity, a purpose. I own businesses, employ thousands of people, contribute to society in meaningful ways. War between our kinds would destroy everything I've worked for. What about the notebook? Amos asked. Grimm's testimony? Classify it, Josiah said. Bury it so deep that it becomes legend rather than fact. The truth is too dangerous to release, Agent Whitfield. The public couldn't handle knowing that monsters walk among them, that their leaders might not be entirely human, that science has created things that shouldn't exist. Or, Fairweather said, we use it as leverage. Insurance against betrayal. Josiah smiled, an expression that looked wrong on his inhuman features. That would be wise. Mutual assured destruction has prevented wars before. Over the next several hours, they hammered out the details of what would come to be known within certain circles as the Seattle Accord. It was never officially documented, never formally recognized, but it established a framework for coexistence between humans and the enhanced. As part of the agreement, Amos was designated as the FBI's liaison to the enhanced community. It wasn't a job he'd wanted, but after what he'd seen, he understood its necessity. Someone had to stand between the two worlds to prevent the kind of conflict that would devastate both. The facility in Montana was declared a permanent no-go zone, surrounded by federal land and monitored by satellites. Officially, it was listed as a toxic waste site. Unofficially, it was a tomb for horrors that should never be disturbed. Dr. Hollowell's location remained a closely guarded secret, known only to a handful of individuals. Periodic surveillance confirmed he was still alive, still working, but as long as he remained isolated, he was deemed a contained threat. The enhanced individuals in positions of power were discreetly monitored but not confronted. Most, it turned out, were relatively benign, using their abilities in subtle ways that didn't directly harm anyone. The few who crossed lines disappeared quietly, dealt with by their own kind as Josiah had promised. But the real challenge came in the small details, the day-to-day management of an impossible situation. Enhanced individuals who couldn't control their transformations were quietly relocated to a special facility in Alaska, so remote that even if they lost control, no one would be endangered. Children born with enhancements, second-generation test subjects, were identified and offered specialized education to help them manage their abilities. Amos found himself at the center of a shadow world that existed parallel to normal society. He attended meetings in rooms that didn't officially exist, reviewed files that were never written, and made decisions that affected people who weren't supposed to be real. 6 months after the Seattle Accord, he received a package at his home. Inside was a photograph, old, black and white, showing a young teacher standing with his elementary school class. One of the children was circled in red ink. On the back, in handwriting Amos recognized as Grimm's, were the words, "This was who I was. Remember that we were human once." Amos kept the photograph in his desk drawer, a reminder of the man Marcus Enderly had been before he became Ichabod Grimm, before he became something else entirely. It helped him remember that the enhanced individuals he dealt with had once been ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances. A year passed. The Accord held, though there were close calls. An enhanced individual in Detroit lost control and killed 3 people before Josiah's team could intervene. A group of anti-government extremists somehow learned about the program and tried to expose it, only to have their evidence mysteriously disappear and their leaders vanish without a trace. Amos aged rapidly during that year, the stress of maintaining the balance taking its toll. He developed a nervous habit of checking shadows, of listening for sounds that didn't belong, of watching people for signs that they might not be entirely human. His wife noticed the change, the way he'd sometimes stare at nothing, lost in thoughts he could never share. Late one night, as he sat in his office reviewing reports of suspected enhanced activity, his phone rang. It was Verity. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Someone's been killing enhanced individuals, 3 in the last week, all using the same method, massive electrical discharge, directly to the nervous system. Someone knows how to kill them," Amos said. "Someone who shouldn't," Verity confirmed. "Josiah's investigating, but he's concerned. If there's a hunter targeting enhanced individuals, the Accord could collapse. They'll go into hiding, or worse, they'll fight back." "Any leads?" "One," Verity said. "All 3 victims received the same message before they died. The prototype program was a mistake. Evolution should not be forced." "Hollowell?" "That's what we're afraid of," Verity said. "If he's decided the enhanced are failures, if he's creating something to replace them—" She didn't need to finish. Amos understood the implications. They weren't just managing the aftermath of past experiments anymore. they were potentially facing a new phase of the program, one designed to eliminate the old test subjects and replace them with something worse. "I'll contact Josiah," Amos said. "Set up a meeting with the council. If Hollowell is making a move, we need to be ready." As he hung up the phone, Amos looked at the photograph of Marcus Enderle's class. Those innocent faces, frozen in time, unaware of what the future held. He wondered how many of them were still alive, still human, still ignorant of the monsters that walked among them. The truth was a burden, Amos had learned. Some secrets were kept not out of malice but out of mercy. The world wasn't ready to know about the enhanced, about the experiments that had created them, about the delicate balance that kept them from becoming humanity's executioners or successors. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, and Amos feared that the Seattle Accord was just a temporary measure, a finger in a dam that was already beginning to crack. Someday the truth would come out. Someday the world would have to confront what science had created in those hidden facilities, what had been unleashed in the name of progress and evolution. When that day came, Amos hoped there would be people like Marcus Enderle, enhanced individuals who remembered their humanity, who chose to protect rather than prey upon the weak. Because if there weren't, if the monsters truly won, then Hollowell's vision of forced evolution would become reality, and baseline humanity would become extinct. The phone rang again. Another incident, another crisis, another secret to keep. Amos answered it, as he always did, as he always would until the burden finally broke him, or the truth finally set everyone free. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing thousands of people going about their lives, blissfully unaware of the darkness that moved among them. And in that darkness, things that had once been human watched and waited, bound by an accord written in shadow and sealed with the promise of mutual annihilation. The prototype program had ended decades ago, but its legacy lived on in flesh and fear, in monsters and men, in secrets that could never be fully contained. And Agent Amos Whitfield, keeper of those secrets, guardian of that terrible balance, continued his vigil, knowing that each day of peace was bought with silence, and each night might be the last before the truth finally escaped its cage. In the end, Marcus Enderle had been right about one thing. Some knowledge was too dangerous to possess, but once known, it could never be forgotten. And so Amos carried it, this burden of truth, hoping that when the time came to pass it on, he would find someone strong enough to bear it without breaking, wise enough to use it without destroying everything, and human enough to remember that even monsters had once been men. The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a humid Tuesday morning in August. FBI. Special Agent Phineas Moorcock had been awake anyway, studying behavioral patterns in a series of seemingly unrelated disappearances across rural Pennsylvania. At 49 years old, with 23 years in the Bureau, Phineas had developed an instinct for when something didn't fit the normal patterns. This call, he immediately knew, was one of those times. Agent Moorcock, the voice on the other end, belonged to Sheriff Barnabas Coldwell from Millbrook County, a rural jurisdiction about 3 hours north of Philadelphia. "We've got a situation here that's unusual. Missing person case, but the family's behavior is setting off every alarm bell I've got. I think we need federal assistance." Phineas sat up straighter, already reaching for his notepad. "Tell me what you have, Sheriff." "Missing man named Hezekiah Thorne, age 34. Been gone for 6 days now. Lives with his extended family on a compound, and I use that word deliberately, about 15 miles outside town. The Ashford family. Old money, old blood, been in this area since before the Revolution. Who reported him missing? There was a pause. That's where it gets interesting. It wasn't the family. It was his employer at the local hardware store. Says Hezekiah hasn't shown up for work in a week, which is completely out of character. When I went to talk to the family, they acted like they had no idea he was even missing. Could he have left without telling them? Agent Moorcock, this family, they're different. They all live together on this massive estate. We're talking about 14 adults and 6 children, all related by blood or marriage. They claim Hezekiah is visiting relatives in Ohio, but when I asked for contact information, they got evasive. And there's something else. What? Hezekiah Thorne isn't originally from the family. He married about 5 years ago. Married the patriarch's daughter, Constance. According to the employer, Hezekiah had been acting strange for weeks before he disappeared. Nervous, jumpy, kept talking about how he needed to get out before it was too late. Phineas was already getting dressed, phone wedged between his ear and shoulder. I'll be there by noon, Sheriff. In the meantime, don't approach the family again. If they're involved in his disappearance, we don't want to spook them. The drive to Millbrook County took Phineas through progressively smaller towns and deeper forests. The landscape changed from urban sprawl to agricultural fields to dense woodland that seemed to press in on the narrow roads. By the time he reached the sheriff's office, the temperature had climbed to 92 degrees, and the humidity made the air feel like breathing through a wet cloth. Sheriff Coldwell was a tall, lean man in his 60s with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of outdoor work. He greeted Phineas with a firm handshake and immediately led him to a small conference room where he'd assembled everything they had on Hezekiah Thorne and the Ashford family. Before we get into the details, Coldwell said, I need to give you some context about the Ashfords. They're not just old money, they're old everything. Old traditions, old ways of doing things. They keep to themselves mostly, homeschool their children, grow their own food. Not quite Amish, but not far from it either. Any history of violence, criminal activity? Nothing proven, Coldwell said carefully. But there have been incidents over the years. People who cross them having accidents. Business competitors who suddenly decided to leave town. And there's a pattern of people who marry into the family, either conforming completely or disappearing. Not officially missing, you understand. The family always has explanations. They moved away, they're traveling, they're caring for sick relatives elsewhere. But Hezekiah is the first one where someone outside the family has raised the alarm. Phineas studied the photographs of Hezekiah Thorne. He was a handsome man with dark hair and intelligent eyes, but in the more recent photos there was something haunted about his expression. Tell me about the patriarch. Zebedee Ashford, Coldwell said, pulling out another photograph. The man in the picture was perhaps 70 years old, with a full white beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed to stare right through the camera. He's the absolute authority in that family. His word is law. Has 4 sons, Mordecai, Josiah, Ephraim, and Nathaniel, all in their 40s and 50s. Each of them has children, and those children are starting to have children. It's a proper dynasty. And Hezekiah married Zebedee's daughter? Constance, yes, she's 31, was considered a spinster by the family's standards until Hezekiah came along. He was an outsider, grew up in Philadelphia, came here to work at the hardware store. How he met Constance is a mystery. The family doesn't socialize much with outsiders. Phineas spent the next several hours reviewing everything they had on the Ashford family. Tax records showed they owned over 3,000 acres of land, including forests, farmland, and several businesses in town operating under shell companies. But what caught his attention were the death certificates. Over the past 50 years, numerous members of the Ashford family had died on the property, all from natural causes according to the official records, but the frequency was unusual. "I want to visit the compound," Phineas said finally. Coldwell looked uncomfortable. "They don't take kindly to uninvited visitors. And technically we don't have probable cause for a warrant." "I'm not going with a warrant," Phineas said. "I'm going as a concerned federal agent following up on a missing person report. They can refuse to talk to me, but their reaction will tell me plenty." The Ashford compound was accessed via a private road that wound through dense forest for nearly 2 miles. Signs every few hundred yards warned against trespassing, and Phineas noticed several game cameras positioned to monitor anyone approaching. The forest eventually opened into a clearing containing what could only be described as a small village. The main house was a massive Georgian-style mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from another century. Surrounding it were smaller houses, barns, work sheds, and what appeared to be a chapel. Everything was meticulously maintained, painted white with black shutters, giving the compound an eerily uniform appearance. As Phineas parked his car, people began emerging from the various buildings. Men in work clothes, women in long dresses, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts. They didn't approach, just stood and watched as Phineas walked toward the main house. He was intercepted before he reached the front door by a man in his 40s who bore a strong resemblance to Zebedee Ashford. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone polite but cool. "I'm Special Agent Phineas Moorcock with the FBI," Phineas said, showing his credentials. "I'm investigating the disappearance of Hezekiah Thorne. Are you a member of the Ashford family?" "I'm Mordecai Ashford," the man said, "and there's no disappearance to investigate. Hezekiah is visiting family in Ohio. I'd like to speak with his wife, Constance. She's resting. The situation has been stressful for her." "What situation would that be?" Phineas asked. "If he's just visiting family?" Mordecai's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "The situation of having outsiders questioning our family's private matters." Before Phineas could respond, the front door of the mansion opened, and Zebedee Ashford himself emerged. Despite his age, he moved with surprising vigor, descending the porch steps with the confidence of a much younger man. Up close, his presence was even more commanding, those blue eyes sharp and calculating. "Agent Moorcock," Zebedee said, somehow knowing his name without being told. "I understand you're concerned about our Hezekiah. I appreciate the diligence, but I assure you he's perfectly safe. Then you won't mind providing me with contact information so I can verify that," Phineas said. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Zebedee said smoothly. "The relatives he's visiting are particular about their privacy. Religious reasons, you understand. They don't use phones or computers. Then, perhaps you could tell me exactly where he is and I could pay them a visit." "That would be inappropriate without their permission," Zebedee said. "Surely you understand the importance of respecting religious freedoms, Agent Moorcock." Phineas studied the old man's face, noting the slight tension around his eyes, the way his sons had moved to flank him protectively. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to be direct with you. Hezekiah's employer is concerned. He said Hezekiah was frightened before he disappeared. If there's something going on here, if Hezekiah is in some kind of trouble, now is the time to tell me." "The only trouble," Zebedee said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "is that Hezekiah has been filling his head with modern nonsense. Ideas that conflict with our family's values. Sometimes a man needs time away to reflect on what's truly important. When he returns, I'm sure he'll have a clearer perspective." "And when will that be?" "When God wills it," Zebedee said simply. A movement caught Phineas's eye. A young woman was watching from an upstairs window of the mansion. She had dark hair and a pale, drawn face. When she realized Phineas had seen her, she quickly backed away from the window, but not before he saw her mouth something. It looked like help. "Is that Constance?" Phineas asked, gesturing to the window. Zebedee didn't even look. "As Mordecai told you, Constance is resting. Now, Agent Moorcock, unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave our property. We've been more than cooperative, but we value our privacy." Phineas knew he was being dismissed, but he also knew he'd learned something valuable. The family was definitely hiding something, and Constance Ashford might be the key to finding out what. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Ashford," Phineas said. "And just so we're clear, the FBI takes missing person cases very seriously. If Hezekiah doesn't surface soon, we'll be back, and next time it won't be just me." "We have nothing to hide," Zebedee said, but there was something in his tone that suggested otherwise. "Good day, Agent Moorcock." As Phineas drove away, he watched in his rearview mirror as the family members slowly dispersed, returning to their buildings like actors leaving a stage. The whole encounter had felt choreographed, rehearsed. Every word, every movement calculated to present a specific image. Back at the sheriff's office, Phineas immediately began making calls. He needed background checks on every adult member of the Ashford family, financial records for their businesses, and most importantly, he needed to find a way to speak with Constance Ashford alone. "What's your read?" Sheriff Coldwell asked. "They're lying," Phineas said flatly. "Every single one of them knows exactly what happened to Hezekiah Thorne. The question is whether they're protecting him or protecting themselves from him." "You think he could be dangerous?" "No," Phineas said, remembering the fear in the recent photographs of Hezekiah, the woman in the window mouthing, "Help." "I think he discovered something about that family, something they don't want revealed. And I think they've done something to keep him quiet." That evening, as Phineas reviewed his notes in his hotel room, his phone rang. The number was blocked. "Agent Moorcock." The voice was female, young, frightened. "Yes, who is this?" I can't say, but it's about Hezekiah. You need to know. He's not in Ohio." "Where is he?" There was a pause, then the sound of breathing. "Look in the old mine, the sealed one on the north edge of the property. But be careful. They know you're getting close, and The line went dead. Phineas immediately tried to call back, but the number was untraceable. He sat there for a moment, processing what he'd just heard. An old mine. It would be the perfect place to hide something, or someone. He called Sheriff Coldwell. "Sheriff, what do you know about old mines on the Ashford property?" "There are several," Coldwell said. "Coal mines from the 1800s. All supposed to be sealed for safety. Why?" "I just got a tip." "Can you get me a geological survey map?" "I'll have it for you first thing in the morning." "Agent Moorcock, if you're thinking of going out there." "I'm thinking," Phineas said, "that Hezekiah Thorne might be running out of time. If he's being held somewhere, especially in an old mine, every hour matters." That night, Phineas couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the Ashford family, their synchronized movements, their rehearsed responses. It reminded him of something, a case he'd worked years ago involving a cult in Montana. The same defensive unity, the same practiced deception. But this felt different. Older, more deeply rooted. He got up and opened his laptop, searching for historical records about the Ashford family. What he found made his blood run cold. Over the past 2 centuries, there had been dozens of disappearances associated with the family. People who had worked for them, married into the family, or simply gotten too close to their secrets. Most were never officially reported missing. only mentioned in old newspaper articles or personal letters that had found their way into historical archives. One name kept appearing in the older records, the Covenant of Ashford. References to it were vague, but it seemed to be some kind of religious or philosophical doctrine that the family followed. One letter from 1892 described it as a blasphemous perversion of Christianity that places the family bloodline above all else, even God himself. Phineas was so absorbed in his research that he almost didn't notice the sound outside his hotel room door. A soft scratching, like someone trying to pick the lock. He quietly reached for his service weapon, moving silently toward the door. The scratching stopped, and he heard footsteps moving away down the hallway. He yanked open the door, weapon raised, but the hallway was empty. However, there was something on the floor where someone had been standing. A dead raven, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, and beneath it, a note written in spidery handwriting. "Stop looking, or join Hezekiah in the dark." Phineas didn't sleep that night. He sat in a chair facing the door, weapon within reach, studying the dead raven and the note. The handwriting was old-fashioned, the kind taught in schools a century ago. The paper itself felt aged, yellowed at the edges despite apparently being written recently. Everything about the Ashford family seemed to exist outside of normal time. At first light, he met Sheriff Coldwell at the station. The sheriff took one look at the dead bird and his face went pale. "That's an old warning in these parts," Coldwell said. "Goes back to the colonial days. Dead raven means death is watching you. My grandmother used to tell stories." "Stories," Phineas prompted, "about the old families, the ones who came here before the Revolution, who brought their own traditions from the old country. She said they had ways of dealing with problems that the law couldn't touch." Phineas spread out the geological survey maps Coldwell had obtained. The Ashford property was marked with several mine shafts, most dating from the 1850s to the 1890s. One in particular caught his attention: the Jeremiah mine on the north edge of the property, sealed in 1894 after a collapse that killed 17 workers. "That's the one," Phineas said, tapping the map. "My informant specifically mentioned the sealed mine on the north edge." "You can't go there without a warrant," Coldwell said, "and no judge is going to sign off based on an anonymous tip and a dead bird." "Then I need more evidence," Phineas said. "Tell me about Constance Ashford. Has she ever been seen in town without family members?" "Never," Coldwell said. "The Ashford women don't go anywhere alone. It's one of their rules. They shop in groups, always accompanied by at least one of the men." "What about medical care? Surely they need to see doctors sometimes." Coldwell shook his head. "They have their own midwife, old Agatha Ashford. She's delivered every baby in that family for the past 40 years. They only go to the hospital for serious emergencies, and even then, the whole family shows up. It's intimidating as hell for the staff." Phineas's phone rang. It was the FBI field office in Philadelphia. "Agent Moorcock, we've completed the background checks you requested on the Ashford family," the analyst said. "There are some unusual patterns. Several family members have Social Security numbers that were issued to people who supposedly died as infants. Others have documentation that doesn't match up. Birth certificates from hospitals that didn't exist at the time. Marriage licenses with forged signatures. Identity fraud? On a massive scale, spanning decades. It's like they've been creating false identities for family members, possibly to hide the real size of their family or to conceal deaths that were never reported." "Send me everything you have," Phineas said. This was the leverage he needed. That afternoon, Phineas returned to the Ashford compound, this time with Sheriff Coldwell and 2 deputies. He didn't have a warrant yet, but the evidence of identity fraud gave him probable cause to ask more pointed questions. The family's reaction to their arrival was immediate and coordinated. By the time they reached the main house, at least 30 family members had assembled on the front lawn, creating a human barrier between the law enforcement officers and the house. Zebedee Ashford emerged from the crowd, his expression thunderous. "Agent Moorcock, I thought I made our position clear yesterday." "Mr. Ashford, I'm here about a different matter now," Phineas said. "We've discovered numerous instances of identity fraud connected to your family. False social security numbers, forged documents. These are federal crimes." For the first time, Phineas saw uncertainty in the patriarch's eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then you won't mind if we speak to each family member individually, verify their identities?" "You have no right." "Actually, I do," Phineas interrupted. "Identity fraud falls under federal jurisdiction. Now, we can do this the easy way, with your cooperation. Or I can return with a full FBI tactical team and warrants for everyone on this property." The crowd of family members stirred uneasily. Phineas noticed several of the younger members exchanging worried glances. One young man, probably in his early 20s, seemed particularly agitated. "Father," one of Zebedee's sons, Phineas thought it was Ephraim, said quietly, "Perhaps we should cooperate. We have nothing to hide." Zebedee turned on his son with surprising venom. "Silence. You forget yourself." The outburst caused more unease among the family members. Phineas seized on the division. "Anyone who wants to speak with me individually can do so," he announced to the crowd. "You have rights regardless of what anyone tells you. If you're being held here against your will, if you're afraid, we can protect you." "No one here needs your protection," Zebedee said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Then something unexpected happened. The young man who looked agitated stepped forward. "I'll talk to you." The reaction was immediate. Several family members grabbed him, pulling him back. Zebedee's face went purple with rage. "Ezekiel, you will not let him go," Phineas commanded, his hand moving to his weapon, "unless you want to add obstruction of justice to the charges." Reluctantly, the family members released Ezekiel. He was trembling as he approached Phineas, glancing back at his family with obvious fear. "Not here," he whispered. "Please, not here." Phineas nodded and guided him to the sheriff's vehicle. As they drove away, he could see the family in the rearview mirror, standing in a tight group, watching them leave. At the sheriff's station, Ezekiel Ashford, who turned out to be Mordecai's son and Zebedee's grandson, sat in the interview room, his hand shaking as he accepted a cup of coffee. "You're safe here," Phineas assured him. "Whatever you tell us stays in this room until you're ready." Ezekiel was quiet for a long moment, then, "Hezekiah is dead." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Phineas kept his expression neutral, though his heart was racing. "How do you know this?" "Because I helped bury him," Ezekiel whispered, tears starting to stream down his face. "God forgive me, I helped bury him." "Where?" "In the old mine, like you heard." "But he was already dead when we put him there. He'd been dead for 3 days. How did he die?" Ezekiel was sobbing now. "The purification." "He failed the purification." "What is the purification?" It's what happens when someone in the family breaks the covenant. When they threaten to expose our ways to the outside world. Hezekiah wanted to leave, wanted to take Constance with him. He said our ways were evil, that we were all damned. Grandfather couldn't allow it. So Zebedee killed him. Not personally, it's done by the family, the whole family. We all have to participate. or we become the next to be purified. Even the children have to watch, so they learn. Phineas felt sick. You're telling me the entire family participated in murdering Hezekiah Thorne? It's not seen as murder, Ezekiel said. It's seen as salvation. Grandfather says we're saving their souls by preventing them from betraying the family. The betrayal would damn them forever, but the purification cleanses them. How many others have there been? I don't know exactly. But there are others in the mine, many others, going back generations. What about Constance? Is she safe? Ezekiel's face crumpled. She's next. She's been marked for purification. They're waiting for the new moon 3 days from now. That's when it always happens, when the night is darkest. Phineas immediately called for backup. Within hours, the compound was surrounded by FBI agents and state police. The warrant was expedited based on Ezekiel's testimony, and as the sun set, they moved in. The raid was surreal. The family didn't resist physically, but they began singing. A hymn in what sounded like an archaic form of English, maybe even Middle English. They stood in a circle around Zebedee, who held an old leather-bound book, reading from it in a booming voice even as agents placed him in handcuffs. Constance was found locked in a room in the basement of the main house. She was emaciated, clearly having been starved, and had wounds on her arms that looked like they'd been inflicted as part of some ritual. She was barely conscious but alive. The search of the compound revealed horrors beyond what even Ezekiel had described. Hidden rooms contained detailed records of purifications, going back to 1798. Names, dates, methods. The Ashford family had been systematically murdering members who tried to leave or expose their practices for over 2 centuries. In Zebedee's study, they found the original Covenant of Ashford, written in 1794 by the family's founder, Matthias Ashford. It outlined a belief system that placed the family bloodline above all else, claiming that the Ashfords were chosen by God to preserve pure blood and ancient ways against the corruption of the modern world. Any dilution of the bloodline or exposure of their practices was considered a sin worthy of death. The sealed mine was opened the next day. The smell that emerged was indescribable. Inside, forensic teams found remains dating back decades, possibly centuries. Some were recent enough to identify through DNA and dental records. Hezekiah Thorne was among them, his body showing signs of ritualistic torture before death. But what disturbed Phineas most were the children's drawings found in the compound schoolroom. Crayon illustrations of the purification ritual, drawn with the innocent precision of young hands. The indoctrination started early, turning murder into a sacred duty, violence into love. During the interrogations, the full scope of the family's crimes emerged. The identity fraud was to hide the true number of family members, many of whom were products of incest, born with deformities that were hidden from the outside world. Some of these children had been killed at birth if their deformities were too severe. Their deaths never reported. The businesses the family owned were fronts for money laundering, funding their isolated lifestyle and bribing local officials to look the other way. Sheriff Coldwell was shocked to learn that 2 of his own deputies had been receiving payments from the Ashfords for years. Mordecai Ashford, during his interrogation, remained unrepentant. "You don't understand," he told Phineas. "We are preserving something sacred. The outside world is poison, corruption, death. We keep the old ways alive. We keep the blood pure." "You murder your own family members," Phineas countered. "We saved them," Mordecai insisted, "and ourselves. Every family has rules. Ours are simply stricter. And Hezekiah? What was his crime? He wanted to destroy us. He gathered evidence, took photographs, made recordings. He was going to expose us to the world. We offered him mercy. Leave and never return. But he refused. He wanted to take Constance to corrupt her with his modern ideas. We had no choice. There's always a choice, Phineas said. Mordecai smiled, a cold expression that reminded Phineas uncomfortably of his father. Is there? You follow your laws, we follow ours. Who's to say which is right? The difference is, our laws don't involve torturing and murdering family members. Don't they? Mordecai asked. How many families has your government destroyed in the name of law? How many children taken from their parents? How many traditions crushed? We simply chose to enforce our own justice rather than submit to yours. The trials that followed were a media sensation. The Ashford family murders, as they became known, captivated the nation. 37 family members were arrested, though charges varied based on their level of participation. The children were placed in protective custody and extensive therapy. Zebedee Ashford died in custody before the trial, apparently of a heart attack, though some suspected suicide. He left behind a note that simply said, "The covenant endures." His sons were all convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The women received lesser sentences, with some successfully arguing they had been coerced and brainwashed from birth. The younger generation, like Ezekiel, who had cooperated with authorities, received plea deals in exchange for their testimony. Constance Ashford survived, though she would need years of therapy to process what had happened to her. She revealed that Hezekiah had tried to save not just her, but other family members who wanted to leave. He'd been building a network, planning a mass escape. That's what had triggered the family's violent response. He was brave, she told Phineas during one of their final interviews. Braver than any of us. He knew what they would do to him, but he tried anyway. He said someone had to break the chain, or it would go on forever. The compound was eventually demolished, the land sold to pay for restitution to the victims' families. The mine was permanently sealed after all the remains were removed and identified. 23 victims in total, the oldest dating back to 1823. 6 months after the arrests, Phineas Moorcock found himself back in Millbrook County. The trials were ongoing, but he'd been called back for a disturbing development. 3 members of the Ashford family who had been in custody had died under mysterious circumstances. Apparent suicides, but the timing and method were suspicious. Sheriff Coldwell, who had been cleared of any involvement with the family's corruption, met him at the station. The man had aged visibly since the events at the compound, the weight of having missed such horror in his jurisdiction clearly taking its toll. All 3 died within the same hour, Coldwell explained, leading Phineas to the evidence room. Different facilities, no communication between them, but exactly the same time, 3:33 a.m. They all somehow ingested poison, though we can't figure out how they got it. Which family members? Josiah, Ephraim, and Nathaniel Ashford, 3 of Zebedee's 4 sons. Only Mordecai is still alive, and he's in solitary confinement under suicide watch. Phineas examined the toxicology reports. The poison was unusual, a plant-based compound that forensic experts couldn't immediately identify. Have you checked the compound again? What's left of it, yes. But Agent Moorcock, there's something else, something we didn't tell the media. Coldwell pulled out an evidence bag containing 3 pieces of paper. Each had the same message written in what appeared to be blood. The covenant endures. The blood remembers. They were found in the cells after the bodies were removed, Coldwell explained. But here's the thing. The blood doesn't match the deceased. It doesn't match anyone in our database. Phineas felt a chill run down his spine. Are you telling me someone else was in those cells? That's impossible. There's video surveillance, guards every 30 feet. No one went in or out except authorized personnel. Then how do you explain the blood? Coldwell had no answer. That afternoon, Phineas visited Mordecai Ashford in the maximum security facility where he was being held. The man had lost weight, his once robust frame now gaunt, but his eyes still held that unsettling intensity that seemed to be an Ashford family trait. "Your brothers are dead," Phineas told him bluntly. Mordecai showed no surprise. "The Covenant demands sacrifice." "Did you know this was going to happen?" "I knew they would fulfill their duty when the time came, as will I, when my time arrives." "Who's orchestrating this? Who's given the orders with your father gone?" Mordecai smiled. "You still don't understand. The Covenant doesn't need leaders. It exists in our blood, in our bones. Every Ashford carries it within them, even those you think you've saved. The children are in protective custody. They're getting help. You can take the child from the Covenant, but you cannot take the Covenant from the child," Mordecai said. "They will remember. When they come of age, when the blood calls to them, they will remember their duty. You're talking about indoctrination, psychological conditioning. It can be overcome with proper treatment. Am I?" Mordecai leaned forward. "Tell me, Agent Moorcock, have you checked on young Ezekiel lately? The one who betrayed us?" Phineas hadn't, but the question sent alarm bells ringing in his mind. He immediately called the witness protection team handling Ezekiel. The young man had been relocated to Connecticut, given a new identity, and was supposedly attending college. "He's fine," the handler assured him. "Checked in yesterday. Adjusting well to his new life." But something in Mordecai's smile made Phineas uneasy. He decided to verify personally and drove to Connecticut that evening. The apartment where Ezekiel was supposedly living was empty. Had been for weeks, according to the landlord. The handler, who'd assured Phineas everything was fine, couldn't explain the discrepancy. Security footage showed Ezekiel leaving the building 3 weeks ago and never returning. A nationwide manhunt began immediately, but it was Constance Ashford who provided the crucial lead. She called Phineas from the psychiatric facility where she was recovering. "I've been having dreams," she said, her voice trembling. "Not dreams, memories. Things they did to us as children, things they made us forget. There's another property, Agent Moorcock, one that wasn't on any of the official records." "Where?" "West Virginia, near Harper's Ferry. It's where they took the children for special training, where they taught us the deepest mysteries of the Covenant. Ezekiel would go there. If the blood is calling him back, that's where he'd go." The property Constance described was a 100-acre farm, registered under a shell company that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had missed. When they arrived with a tactical team, they found not just Ezekiel but 12 other Ashford family members, cousins and distant relatives who hadn't been at the compound during the raid. They were conducting some kind of ceremony in a barn that had been converted into a makeshift temple. The walls were covered with genealogical charts going back centuries, showing the Ashford bloodline and its connections to other families across the country. At the center was Ezekiel, but he was different. His eyes had the same fanatic gleam Phineas had seen in Zebedee's, and he was reading from a book that looked identical to the Covenant they'd confiscated. "There are copies," Ezekiel said calmly as he was arrested. "There have always been copies. Hidden, protected, waiting. You can destroy one nest, Agent Moorcock, but the Covenant is like a vine. It grows wherever Ashford blood is planted." The investigation that followed revealed the terrifying scope of what they were dealing with. The Ashford family tree extended far beyond what they'd initially discovered. Through generations of strategic marriages and secret adoptions, Ashford blood had spread throughout the region. There were branches of the family operating under different names in 5 states. Some had abandoned the extreme practices of the main family, living relatively normal lives. but others had maintained the traditions, meeting in secret, practicing modified versions of the rituals. It was a network, a hidden culture that had survived for centuries by adapting, hiding, and protecting its own. Dr. Sarah Whitmire, a cult specialist brought in to consult on the case, explained it to Phineas during one of their sessions. What you're dealing with isn't just a criminal family. It's a closed culture with its own language, its own laws, its own understanding of reality. For these children, the covenant isn't just something they were taught, it's the fundamental framework through which they understand the world. So, we can't deprogram them. Some, perhaps. The ones who had outside exposure, who had doubts. But for those raised completely within the system, it would be like trying to convince someone that up is down and down is up. Their entire conceptual framework is built on the covenant's teachings. The trials continued, but they were complicated by the constant suicide attempts among the imprisoned family members. Despite every precaution, 7 more died in custody over the following year, all in ways that shouldn't have been possible given the security measures. Even more disturbing were the letters that started arriving at the FBI office, addressed to Phineas personally. They came from different locations across the country, written in different hands, but all containing the same message. The blood remembers. The covenant endures. The harvest will come. Analysis showed that the letters were from children. Ashford children who had been placed in foster care or adopted after being removed from the compound. Somehow, despite being separated and having no contact with each other, they were all writing the same words. One foster mother in Oregon called in a panic. The 8-year-old Ashford girl in her care had been a model child for months, but she'd found the girl in the backyard at 3:33 a.m., digging a hole with her bare hands until her fingers bled, muttering about preparing for the harvest. A couple in Minnesota reported that their adopted Ashford son, age 10, had started building what he called the remembering place in their basement. A shrine made of bones he'd collected from the woods and arranged in patterns that matched those found in the compound's temple. The psychological team working with the children was at a loss. Dr. Whitmire theorized that the conditioning went deeper than conventional brainwashing. It's possible, she told Phineas, that the trauma and indoctrination are so severe that it's actually altered their neurology. The patterns are literally carved into their developing brains. But there was another theory, one that no one wanted to voice officially, but which haunted Phineas's thoughts. What if it wasn't just psychological? What if there was something genetic, some predisposition that the centuries of selective breeding had reinforced? It sounded like eugenics pseudoscience, but the synchronized behaviors, the shared delusions appearing independently, the inability to break the conditioning, it all pointed to something beyond normal psychology. The investigation took another dark turn when they discovered that Hezekiah Thorne had left behind more than anyone realized. Hidden in a safety deposit box under a false name, they found USB drives containing hundreds of hours of secretly recorded footage from inside the compound. The videos showed the full extent of the Ashford family's rituals, the purifications they knew about, but there were other ceremonies. Blood rituals performed on infants, marking them as part of the covenant. Children as young as 5 being taught to kill animals in specific ways, told that this was how they showed love to the family. Teenage members undergoing trials that seemed designed to break their individual will and bind them to the collective. But the most disturbing footage was of Zebedee Ashford speaking directly to the camera, apparently aware he was being recorded. "You think you understand," he said, looking directly into the lens. "You think we're criminals, madmen, but we are evolution. We are what humanity becomes when it chooses blood over the chaos of the modern world. Every generation we grow stronger. Every child carries the potential for transformation. And one day, when the world burns in its own corruption, we will emerge from our hidden places, pure and powerful, to inherit what remains. The tape was dated just 1 week before Hezekiah's disappearance. It seemed he'd been discovered as the spy, but instead of immediately killing him, Zebedee had used him to send a message. Phineas visited Constance one last time before the final trial dates. She had improved significantly, gaining weight and color, but there was a sadness in her eyes that seemed permanent. "Do you ever feel it?" he asked her. "The call that the others talk about?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Every night at 3:33 I wake up. Every time. My body knows, even though my mind resists. I hear whispers in a language I was never taught but somehow understand. I see symbols that make sense even though they shouldn't." "But you resist." "Because of Hezekiah," she said. "He showed me there was another way." "But, Agent Moorcock, I'm fighting against something that's part of me. It's in my blood, in my genes, in the very structure of my brain. Every day is a choice to resist, and some days—" She trailed off, but Phineas understood. The Ashford family hadn't just committed crimes. They'd created a self-perpetuating system of horror that might take generations to fully eliminate, if it could be eliminated at all. The final trials concluded with 29 convictions for murder, with sentences ranging from 20 years to life. But even as the legal system declared victory, Phineas knew the real battle was just beginning. Somewhere out there, in small towns and rural communities across the country, other branches of the family tree were growing, hidden, waiting. 2 years had passed since the Ashford trials concluded, and Phineas Moorcock had tried to move on to other cases. But the Ashford file remained open on his desk, growing thicker with each passing month as new reports trickled in from across the country. Mysterious disappearances in communities with historical Ashford connections. Foster families reporting disturbing behavior from Ashford children. And always, always, the letters arriving at 3:33 a.m. according to the postal timestamps. It was a cold December morning when Sheriff Coldwell called with news that would drag Phineas back into the nightmare he'd tried to leave behind. "Agent Moorcock." Coldwell's voice was strained. "You need to come back to Millbrook County. We've found something at the old compound site. I thought that land was sold and developed. The development was delayed due to environmental concerns. Last week, a geological survey team was checking the stability of the old mine shafts, and they found another level, one that we missed during the original investigation." Phineas arrived in Millbrook County that afternoon to find the compound site transformed into an archaeological dig. FBI forensic teams were working alongside historians and anthropologists, carefully excavating what appeared to be a much older structure beneath the sealed mine. "It predates the mine by at least a century," the lead archaeologist, Dr. Benjamin Harwick, explained. "We're looking at colonial-era construction, possibly earlier. The mine was deliberately dug to conceal this." They descended into the excavation via aluminum ladders and temporary lighting. The underground structure was a series of chambers carved from solid rock, connected by narrow passages. The walls were covered with symbols that made Phineas's skin crawl, not because they were overtly threatening, but because they seemed to shift and change in his peripheral vision. "This is where it started," a voice said behind him. Phineas turned to find Mordecai Ashford, shackled and accompanied by 4 guards. The prisoner had been brought from his maximum security cell at Phineas's request, hoping he might provide insight into what they'd discovered. "Your family built this?" Phineas asked. "Built? No," Mordecai said, his eyes gleaming in the artificial light. "Found." Matthias Ashford, our founder, was led here in 1794 by dreams. He said God showed him this place in visions, but when he arrived, it was already ancient. Who built it originally? Does it matter? What matters is what happened here. This is where the first covenant was written, where the blood oath was sworn, where the family was truly born. They moved deeper into the structure, and Phineas noticed that the temperature dropped significantly, though there was no natural reason for it. In the central chamber they found an altar of sorts, a raised stone platform dark with what forensic analysis would later confirm was centuries of bloodstains. But it was the wall behind the altar that made everyone stop and stare. Carved into the rock was a massive family tree, but not like any genealogical chart Phineas had ever seen. The names went back impossibly far, some written in languages that predated modern English. And at the roots of the tree, where the earliest names should be, there were only symbols that hurt to look at directly. "My God," Dr. Harwick breathed. "This goes back to the 12th century at least, maybe earlier." "The Ashfords weren't the first," Mordecai said, a note of reverence in his voice. "We were chosen to continue something that had already existed for centuries. The blood remembers Agent Moorcock because the blood is old. Older than America, older than modern civilization." "You're talking about what? Some kind of ancient cult?" "I'm talking about survival," Mordecai said. "About preservation of something that the modern world has forgotten. Every culture has stories of the old bloodlines, the families chosen to guard ancient knowledge. Most died out or were corrupted. But some endured, some remembered their purpose. In a smaller chamber off the main room, they found records. Hundreds of leather-bound volumes, remarkably preserved in the dry, cold air. The books contained detailed accounts of rituals, bloodlines, and something repeatedly referred to as the harvest. Dr. Harwick, who had some experience with ancient languages, translated fragments. "It's talking about a cycle," he said. "Every few generations there's something called a harvest, where the bloodlines are renewed, strengthened. The language is archaic, metaphorical." "It's not metaphorical," Mordecai said quietly. Before anyone could ask what he meant, one of the FBI agents called out from another chamber. They'd found bodies, not ancient ones, but recent. 3 teenagers, dead for perhaps 6 months, arranged in a ritualistic pattern. Dental records would later identify them as 3 Ashford children who had supposedly been placed in foster care after the compound raid. They'd all disappeared from different states within the same week, their foster families assuming they'd run away. But they'd come here, to this hidden place, for reasons that became clear when they found the note. Written in what appeared to be charcoal on a piece of modern paper were the words, "The harvest requires sacrifice. We offer ourselves willingly, so the blood may endure. Tell our brothers and sisters 3:33 approaches." "What happens at 3:33? Phineas demanded, turning to Mordecai. But Mordecai had gone pale, genuinely shocked for the first time since his arrest. "They started it. Without the elders, without proper preparation, they started the harvest." "What is the harvest?" It's the renewal. Every 49 years, the bloodlines gather. The strongest are chosen to continue. The weak are culled, and the blood is renewed through ritual and sacrifice. But it has to be done properly, with the right words, the right timing, or what? Or it corrupts. It turns inward. The blood becomes poison instead of power. Over the next weeks, reports began coming in from around the country. Ashford family members in custody were falling ill with a mysterious condition that doctors couldn't explain. Their blood was literally changing composition, producing toxins that attacked their own organs. 7 died before medical intervention could even be attempted. The foster children were affected too, though differently. They began experiencing what psychiatrists initially diagnosed as shared psychotic episodes, but the symptoms were unlike anything in the medical literature. They would speak in unison, despite being in different locations, reciting names and dates that corresponded to entries in the ancient books found in the underground chambers. Constance Ashford, who had been recovering well, suddenly relapsed. She was found in her room at 3:33 a.m., having carved symbols into her own flesh with her fingernails, symbols that matched those in the underground chamber, symbols she claimed she'd never seen before. "It's in me," she told Phineas, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I could fight it, but it's getting stronger. Every generation that passes, every child that's born, it gets stronger. Hezekiah was wrong. We can't break the chain, we are the chain. The CDC was brought in when the mysterious illness spread beyond the Ashford family. Several FBI agents who had spent extensive time in the underground chambers began experiencing symptoms. Nightmares featuring the symbols from the walls, temporary paralysis at 3:33 a.m., and in 2 cases, unexplained changes in blood chemistry that resembled what was happening to the Ashfords. Dr. Whitmire, the cult specialist, proposed a theory that sounded insane but fit the evidence. What if the Ashfords weren't just practicing ritual behavior? What if they were maintaining some kind of containment? What if the rituals, as horrible as they were keeping something in check? "You're suggesting the murders were somehow protective?" Phineas asked incredulously. "I'm suggesting that we may have interrupted something we don't understand." Every culture has practices that seem barbaric from the outside, but serve a function within their worldview. If the Ashfords believed they were containing something through their rituals, and we've stopped those rituals. She didn't need to finish. The implications were clear and terrifying. The decision was made to seal the underground chambers permanently. The area was filled with concrete. The land was purchased by the federal government, and it was designated as a permanent no-access zone. But it was too late. On December 21st, the winter solstice, at exactly 3:33 a.m., every surviving member of the Ashford bloodline experienced the same phenomenon. Witnesses described it differently. Some said they convulsed, others said they spoke in tongues. Still others claimed they briefly transformed into something else. But all agreed that something fundamental changed in that moment. When it was over, the mysterious illness stopped. The foster children became calm, almost serene. The imprisoned family members stopped their suicide attempts. But they all shared the same message when questioned. The harvest is complete. The blood remembers. The cycle begins again. Phineas visited Mordecai one last time before retiring from the FBI, the stress and inexplicable nature of the case having taken too great a toll. "What really happened?" he asked. "What is the harvest?" Mordecai looked older, frailer, but also somehow more at peace. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Your modern mind couldn't accept it. But I'll say this. My family preserved something ancient, something that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. You thought you were stopping monsters, but you were destroying guardians." "Guardians of what?" "Of the boundary," Mordecai said. "Between what humanity is and what it could become if certain forces were unleashed. The blood rituals, the purifications, even the murders, they were all part of maintaining that boundary, and now it's broken." "You're saying we're all in danger?" "I'm saying the next 49 years will show whether humanity can survive without the old guardians. The Ashford bloodline will endure. It always has. But our role has changed. We're no longer the keepers of the boundary. We're the inheritors of whatever comes through it." Phineas left that meeting deeply disturbed. He compiled his final report. recommending continued monitoring of all known Ashford descendants and periodic checks of the sealed underground chamber. But he knew it was largely futile. Whatever the Ashford family had been guarding against or maintaining, that responsibility had been irreversibly disrupted. In his retirement, Phineas tried to forget about the case, but reminders were everywhere. News reports of unexplained phenomena that matched patterns from the Ashford records. Missing persons cases with circumstances eerily similar to the family's historical victims. And always the letters that continued to arrive at his home, despite his address being confidential. The last letter he received before his death, from natural causes, the coroner insisted, though it happened at 3:33 a.m., contained only one line: "You freed us, Phineas Moorcock. The harvest thanks you." After Phineas's death, his successor found his private notes on the case. The final entry, dated the night before he died, read, "I've come to believe that some secrets are kept not out of cruelty but out of necessity. The Ashford family were monsters, yes, but they were monsters with a purpose. We destroyed them without understanding that purpose, and I fear future generations will pay the price for our ignorance." The Ashford children grew up, despite all therapeutic intervention, to be strange, isolated adults. They didn't commit crimes, didn't gather in groups, didn't practice the old rituals. But they all, independently, began having children at unusual rates. By 2045, there were over 300 known individuals carrying Ashford blood, scattered across the country. And they all, without exception, woke at 3:33 a.m. every night, staring at something only they could see, waiting for something only they understood. The FBI still maintains a task force dedicated to monitoring Ashford family descendants. The official files state that the threat has been contained, the criminal conspiracy dismantled. But the agents assigned to the task force know better. They know that they're not watching criminals or victims, but something else entirely. The inheritors of an ancient purpose that law enforcement disrupted without ever truly understanding. Some nights, when the monitoring equipment registers simultaneous activity from all subjects at 3:33 a.m., the agents wonder if Mordecai was right. They wonder if the Ashford family hadn't been the disease, but the cure for something far worse. And they wonder what will happen in 49 years, when the next harvest comes, and there are no longer any guardians to maintain the boundary between what is and what should never be. The case remains officially closed. Unofficially, it has become the FBI's most closely guarded secret, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some monsters are better left undisturbed. The Ashford family's physical compound was destroyed, but their true legacy, the questions they raised about the nature of evil, inheritance, and the price of ancient knowledge, continues to haunt those who dare to look too deeply into the darkness they left behind. FBI Special Agent Obadiah Sinclair had spent the better part of his career in the basement of the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., surrounded by boxes of forgotten cases and the ghosts of investigations that had gone nowhere. At 61 years old, with retirement just 4 years away, he'd found his niche in the cold case unit, where his methodical nature and infinite patience made him particularly suited for re-examining cases others had given up on. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September when he pulled file number 1987-11-23-714 from the archive. The case of Elkanah Draper, a 38-year-old accountant who had been found dead in his Baltimore home in November of 1987. The official cause of death was suicide by hanging. Case closed within 2 weeks of the body's discovery. It should have been straightforward, except for a handwritten note paper-clipped to the inside cover of the file. This stinks, Detective Morrison. Detective Morrison had been dead for 15 years, but his reputation lived on. He'd been known for his instincts, and if something about the Draper case had bothered him enough to leave a note, it warranted a second look. Obadiah spread the case files across his desk, adjusting his reading glasses as he began to piece together the story of Elkanah Draper's final days. Draper had been a certified public accountant working for a firm called Brennan, Hollowell and Associates, specializing in government contracts. He was unmarried, described by neighbors as quiet and professional, with no known enemies or significant personal problems. The suicide had been discovered by his secretary when he failed to show up for work for 2 days. Police found him hanging from a ceiling beam in his study, a kicked-over chair beneath him, and a typed suicide note on his desk that read, "I can no longer live with what I've done. The guilt is destroying me. This is the only way." Standard suicide scene except for several details that Detective Morrison had highlighted in his notes. First, the suicide note was typed on Draper's typewriter, but contained 2 spelling errors, unusual for a man described as obsessively meticulous. Second, there were bruises on Draper's wrists that didn't match the hanging ligatures. Third, and most curious, Draper's home safe had been opened and emptied, though, according to the initial investigation, nothing of value was reported missing by his family. Obadiah picked up his phone and called the Baltimore field office. "This is Agent Sinclair from Cold Cases. I need everything you have on a 1987 case, and I mean everything. Evidence logs, witness statements, even the coffee-stained napkins if they're still around." While waiting for the Baltimore office to gather the materials, Obadiah began researching Brennan, Hollowell and Associates. The firm had dissolved in 1991, just 4 years after Draper's death, under a cloud of federal investigation for embezzlement and contract fraud. Several partners had been indicted, though most charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. The investigation had been led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jebediah Crowley, who was now a federal judge. Something about that name rang a bell. Obadiah searched his database and found 3 other cold cases from the late 1980s and early 1990s that had connections to investigations overseen by Crowley. All were suspicious deaths ruled as suicides or accidents. All involved individuals who might have been witnesses in financial crimes cases. The Baltimore evidence arrived the next morning, delivered by a young agent named Prudence Fairbanks, who seemed eager to assist with the cold case. "Agent Sinclair," she said, setting down several boxes. "I pulled everything we had, plus some additional materials from the Baltimore PD archives. There's something you should know. I found a second note from Detective Morrison hidden in the evidence log. He was building his own file on this case before he died." The note was more detailed than the first. "Draper called me 3 days before his death. Said he had information about financial crimes involving federal contracts, millions of dollars being siphoned through ghost companies. He was supposed to meet me the day after he died. Someone knew." Obadiah felt the familiar tingle that came when a cold case started to warm up. "Agent Fairbanks, how would you like to assist me on this investigation?" Her eyes lit up. "I'd be honored, sir." They spent the next week reconstructing Elkanah Draper's life. Through old bank records and correspondence, they discovered that Draper had been quietly documenting financial irregularities at his firm for months before his death. He'd opened a safety deposit box at a bank in Delaware, outside his usual sphere of activity, just 2 weeks before he died. The bank still existed, and remarkably, the safety deposit box had been paid for in advance through 2010. When it wasn't renewed, the contents had been moved to the bank's long-term storage. With a court order, Obadiah and Fairbanks retrieved the box's contents. hundreds of pages of financial documents, copied checks, and a detailed journal in Draper's handwriting. The journal was damning. Draper had discovered that his firm was billing the government for services never rendered, using a complex network of the shell companies to hide the fraud. The scheme involved multiple defense contracts worth over $30 million. Serious money in 1987. But more shocking were the names Draper had identified as being involved in the conspiracy. Along with partners at his firm, he implicated 2 FBI agents, a congressman, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Jebediah Crowley. Crowley wasn't investigating the fraud, Fairbanks said, reading through the documents. He was part of it. He was controlling the investigation to protect the conspirators. And now he's a federal judge with a lifetime appointment, Obadiah said grimly. This is why Draper had to die. He wasn't just a witness. He had documentary proof. They decided to proceed carefully. Accusing a sitting federal judge of murder and corruption wasn't something done lightly. They needed more evidence, and they needed to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. Obadiah reached out to retired FBI agents who had worked in the Baltimore office in 1987. Most claimed to remember nothing about the Draper case, but one, Agent Cornelius Metcalf, now 78 and living in Florida, agreed to meet with them. I remember Elkanah Draper, Metcalf said, sitting on his porch overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. Good man. Came to us with concerns about his firm. We were building a case, had him wearing a wire, gathering evidence. Then suddenly, word came down from above to drop it. National security, they said, need-to-know basis, and we didn't need to know. Who gave that order? Obadiah asked. Metcalf was quiet for a moment. Deputy Director Harold Blackstone. But here's the thing. Blackstone died in a car accident 2 weeks after Draper's supposed suicide. Single car, ran off the road into a tree. No skid marks, no mechanical problems found. The pattern was becoming clear. Everyone who had tried to expose or investigate the fraud had met untimely ends. But why had Detective Morrison survived as long as he did? The answer came from Morrison's widow, whom they tracked down in a nursing home in Annapolis. My husband was paranoid after the Draper case, she said. Made copies of everything, hid them in different places. Said if anything happened to him, someone would find the truth eventually. He died of cancer, Agent Sinclair, but he always believed they gave it to him somehow. Said they were playing a long game. Do you know where he hid these copies? He gave me one location, made me memorize it. Said if the right person ever came asking about Draper, I should tell them. She leaned forward. Unit 47, Chesapeake Storage on Route 50. The key is taped under the 3rd step of our old house, 1423 Maple Street, Baltimore. We sold it in 2001, but Tommy said he made sure the key would stay hidden. The storage unit hadn't been opened in over 15 years. Inside, they found Morrison's shadow investigation. Photographs, recorded conversations, financial documents, and most crucially a cassette tape labeled ED11 1987. They played the tape in Obadiah's office. Elkanah Draper's voice, nervous but determined, filled the room. Detective Morrison, if you're hearing this, it means I'm probably dead. They know I've been talking to you. I've seen cars following me. My phone makes strange noises. And yesterday, someone broke into my office but didn't take anything. They were sending a message. The conspiracy goes higher than I thought. Jebediah Crowley isn't just taking bribes, he's orchestrating the whole thing. He has people in the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, even Congress. They're not just stealing money. They're selling classified defense information to foreign buyers. I have proof hidden in my safety deposit box in Delaware. If they kill me, they'll make it look like suicide or an accident. Please, don't let them get away with it." The recording was made 4 days before Draper's death. Obadiah now had enough to take to his superiors, but he needed to be strategic. Judge Crowley had been on the bench for over 20 years, with powerful connections throughout the justice system. One wrong move and the investigation would be shut down, and Obadiah might end up like Draper and Blackstone. He decided to start with the financial trail. Using modern forensic accounting techniques unavailable in 1987, Fairbanks traced the movement of the embezzled funds. The trail led to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, some of which were still active. More importantly, she found patterns of deposits that coincided with specific government contract awards, creating a clear correlation between the fraud and the payoffs. But as they dug deeper, strange things began happening. Obadiah's computer was hacked, though the FBI's cybersecurity team couldn't determine how. His car developed mysterious mechanical problems that his mechanic couldn't explain. Fairbanks reported being followed by unmarked vehicles. Someone was watching them, trying to intimidate them into dropping the investigation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Obadiah received a call from a woman identifying herself as Martha Hollowell, daughter of Bernard Hollowell, one of the partners at Draper's firm who had died in 1991. "My father left me a letter to be opened on my 40th birthday," she said. "It was last month. In it, he confessed to being part of the conspiracy that killed Elkanah Draper. He named names, Agent Sinclair, including the person who actually carried out the murder. They met Martha at a coffee shop in suburban Maryland. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder, but she handed over her father's letter. It was 12 pages of detailed confession, including an account of the night Draper died. According to Bernard Hollowell, the murder had been carried out by a professional killer hired through Crowley's criminal connections. They had staged it to look like suicide, down to the typed note and the kicked-over chair. Hollowell had been promised immunity from prosecution in exchange for his silence, but the guilt had eaten at him until his death from liver cancer. "My father wrote that Crowley kept files on everyone involved," Martha said. "Blackmail material to ensure their silence. He said Crowley called it his insurance policy and kept it in a hidden safe in his judicial chambers. This was the evidence they needed, but getting it would require a warrant to search a federal judge's chambers, nearly impossible without rock-solid probable cause. They needed someone on the inside, someone close to Crowley who might be willing to help. That someone turned out to be Crowley's own law clerk, a young idealistic lawyer named Timothy Worthington, who had become suspicious of his boss's activities. Worthington had noticed that Crowley regularly met with individuals who had no legitimate business before the court, and that certain case files would disappear from the judge's chambers only to reappear days later. "I went to law school to serve justice," Worthington told them in a clandestine meeting. "If Judge Crowley is corrupt, I want to help expose him. But I need protection. He has connections everywhere." Obadiah arranged for Worthington to be placed in witness protection, but first they needed him to locate and document Crowley's hidden safe. It took 3 weeks of careful observation, but Worthington finally found it, hidden behind a false panel in Crowley's private bathroom, protected by a biometric lock that required Crowley's fingerprint to open. The operation to access Judge Crowley's hidden safe required meticulous planning. Timothy Worthington had to obtain Crowley's fingerprint without arousing suspicion, and they had a narrow window. Crowley would be attending a judicial conference in Boston for 3 days, leaving his chambers relatively unguarded. Worthington managed to lift a clear print from a glass paperweight Crowley handled daily, using a technique the FBI's forensic team had taught him. They created a silicone replica that would fool the biometric scanner, at least long enough to access the safe's contents. On a cold Tuesday evening in October, while Crowley was 500 miles away, Worthington entered the judge's chambers using his legitimate access. Obadiah and Fairbanks waited in a van outside, monitoring through a wire Worthington wore. The building's security cameras had been temporarily disabled by an FBI cyber team under the pretext of routine maintenance. "I'm at the bathroom panel," Worthington whispered. "Applying the print now." There was a soft beep, then the sound of mechanical movement. "It's open." "Jesus Christ, there's a lot in here." "Document everything," Obadiah instructed. "Photographs first, then grab whatever originals you can." For the next hour, Worthington photographed hundreds of documents, bank records, correspondence, photographs of Crowley with known criminals, and most damning, detailed records of bribes and murders for hire, including the contract for Elkanah Draper's death. Crowley had kept meticulous records of his crimes, apparently believing his position made him untouchable. "There's something else," Worthington said. "A ledger with current entries. Agent Sinclair, he's still active. The last entry is from 2 weeks ago, a payment of $300,000 from something called Prometheus LLC. "Grab it all," Obadiah said. "We're pulling you out now." As Worthington was leaving the building, Obadiah's phone rang. It was Deputy Director Margaret Blackwood from FBI headquarters. "Agent Sinclair," her voice was tense, "I just received a call from Judge Crowley. He knows about your investigation. He's claiming harassment and is threatening to file a formal complaint. You need to stand down immediately." "Ma'am, we have evidence that Crowley is involved in murder and corruption." "I don't care what you think you have. This ends now. Report to my office tomorrow morning." The line went dead. Obadiah and Fairbanks exchanged worried glances. Someone had tipped off Crowley, and now the institutional powers were mobilizing to shut down the investigation. "We need to move fast," Obadiah said, "before they can bury this." They drove Worthington to a safe house, then returned to FBI headquarters. Working through the night, they compiled everything they had into a comprehensive report. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, audio recordings, witness testimonies, and now Crowley's own documents. But Obadiah knew that evidence alone wasn't enough when the suspect had power and connections. At 3 a.m., Fairbanks made a discovery that changed everything. "Prometheus LLC, I found it. It's a defense contractor with ties to several Congressional Appropriations Committee members. They've been funneling money to Crowley in exchange for favorable rulings in cases involving government contracts. It's not just historical corruption," Obadiah realized. "It's ongoing, current, which means there are people in power right now who have a vested interest in keeping this buried. What do we do?" Obadiah made a decision that would likely end his career. "We go to the press. If we try to pursue this through official channels, it'll be killed. But if we make it public, they can't stop it." They contacted Rebecca Thornfield, an investigative journalist with the Washington Post who had a reputation for exposing government corruption. They met her in a parking garage, a cliché, but effective for avoiding surveillance. "This is explosive," Thornfield said, reviewing the documents. "But I need corroboration. One source isn't enough for something this big." "We have multiple sources," Obadiah said. "Worthington, Martha Hollowell, the Morrison files, and Draper's own recordings. I'll need to verify everything independently. Give me 72 hours. Those 72 hours were the longest of Obadiah's career. He was called into meeting after meeting with increasingly senior officials, all pressuring him to drop the investigation. His access to FBI databases was restricted. His gun and badge were temporarily confiscated pending an internal review. It was clear that Crowley's influence reached deep into the Justice Department. On the second day, Obadiah received an anonymous call at his home. The voice was disguised, but the message was clear. "You have a nice family, Agent Sinclair. Your daughter Sarah teaches at Lincoln Elementary. Your grandson Jake walks home from school alone. It would be a shame if something happened to them." Obadiah immediately arranged for his family to leave town, sending them to stay with relatives in Canada. He knew he was now in the same position Elkanah Draper had been in 37 years ago, marked for elimination if he didn't back down. But backing down wasn't in Obadiah's nature. He'd spent his career pursuing justice, and he wasn't going to stop now, not when he was this close. He arranged to meet with Thornfield earlier than planned, giving her everything they had, including recordings of the threats he'd received. On the morning of the third day, as Obadiah was preparing for what he assumed would be his termination meeting with Deputy Director Blackwood, news broke. The Washington Post published a front-page exposé. Federal judge implicated in decades-old murder and ongoing corruption scheme. The story was meticulously detailed, with documentary evidence reproduced in the paper and more available online. Within hours, it was picked up by every major news outlet. Social media exploded with outrage. Congressional representatives called for immediate investigations. Judge Crowley tried to respond, holding a press conference where he denied all allegations and claimed he was the victim of a conspiracy. But as he spoke, FBI agents were already executing search warrants at his home and office. Warrants that had been impossible to obtain just days earlier, but were now politically necessary. The search revealed even more than Worthington had found. A second safe in Crowley's home contained cash, gold, and documents related to dozens of other crimes. There were photographs of Crowley meeting with known organized crime figures, recordings of him discussing bribes, and most shocking, a detailed plan for Obadiah's accidental death, scheduled for the following week. Crowley was arrested that afternoon, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, bribery, and obstruction of justice. As he was led away in handcuffs, he passed Obadiah in the courthouse hallway. "You have no idea what you've done," Crowley hissed. "The people I work for don't forgive. They don't forget. You've signed your own death warrant." "Maybe," Obadiah replied. "But at least Elkanah Draper will finally have justice." The investigation expanded rapidly. Crowley's records led to the arrest of 12 other individuals, including 2 current FBI agents, a congressman, and several corporate executives. The network of corruption that had been operating for decades was finally exposed. But the victories came with a cost. Timothy Worthington, despite being in witness protection, was found dead in his safe house, officially ruled a suicide but bearing the same suspicious circumstances as Draper's death. Martha Hollowell disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a note saying she feared for her life. Agent Fairbanks was nearly killed in a suspicious car accident that left her hospitalized for months. Obadiah himself became a target. 3 attempts were made on his life in the 6 months following Crowley's arrest. His home was burned down in an electrical fire. His car's brakes failed on a mountain road. A gunman opened fire on him in a grocery store parking lot, missing only because an off-duty police officer intervened. The trial of Jebediah Crowley was a spectacle. He maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he was being framed by a conspiracy of left-wing activists and corrupt FBI agents. His defense team, paid for by unknown benefactors, was the best money could buy. They challenged every piece of evidence, questioned every witness's credibility, and painted Obadiah as a rogue agent with a personal vendetta. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Crowley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, he turned to Obadiah one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "You've won this battle, but the war continues. There are others like me in positions you can't imagine, with power you can't comprehend. They know who you are now. They know who helped you. Watch your back, Agent Sinclair. Watch it for the rest of your life." 6 months later, Obadiah retired from the FBI. The official story was that he wanted to spend more time with his family after a distinguished career. The truth was that he'd been strongly encouraged to leave by officials who feared his continued presence would make him and the Bureau a target for retaliation. He moved to a small town in Maine, living under an assumed name, always watching for signs that Crowley's associates had found him. He kept a gun within reach at all times and varied his routines to avoid predictability. It wasn't paranoia if they really were after you. Agent Fairbanks recovered from her injuries but transferred to a different division, focusing on white-collar crime that didn't involve powerful judges and shadowy conspiracies. She stayed in touch with Obadiah, calling him monthly from different phones to check in. "Any signs of trouble?" she would ask. "Not yet," he would reply, "but I keep watching." Rebecca Thornfield won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting on the Crowley case, but she too lived with constant vigilance. She'd received enough death threats to take them seriously, and had hired private security after someone broke into her apartment and left a photograph of Elkanah Draper's corpse on her pillow. The Prometheus LLC investigation led to a congressional hearing that exposed widespread corruption in defense contracting. Several more arrests were made, and new oversight measures were implemented. But everyone involved knew it was just the tip of the iceberg. The system that had protected Crowley for decades was wounded but not destroyed. Late at night, Obadiah would think about Elkanah Draper, the quiet accountant who had tried to do the right thing and paid with his life. He thought about Detective Morrison, who had pursued the truth despite the danger. He thought about all the others who had been silenced over the years, their deaths dismissed as suicides or accidents. He'd solved the case, exposed the corruption, and put a killer judge behind bars. By any measure, it was a success. But the victory felt hollow when he considered the cost. The lives lost, the families destroyed, the ongoing threat that hung over everyone who had participated in bringing Crowley down. 2 years had passed since Crowley's conviction, and Obadiah Sinclair had almost convinced himself that the danger had passed. Living quietly in coastal Maine under the name Oliver Whitman, he'd established a routine: morning walks along the rocky shore, afternoons reading in the local library, evenings watching the sunset from his porch. The hypervigilance had faded to a manageable wariness. That changed on a foggy November morning when he found an envelope under his door. No postmark, no return address, just his real name written in careful script: Agent Obadiah Sinclair. Inside was a single photograph: Elkanah Draper's grave, freshly decorated with flowers. On the back, someone had written, "He wasn't the first. You won't be the last." Obadiah immediately contacted Fairbanks through their secure channel. She was now working in the Seattle office, having transferred as far from D.C. as possible. "They've found me," he said simply. "Get out," she replied. "Now. I'll contact the Marshal's Service." But as Obadiah packed his essential belongings, he realized something. He was tired of running. 63 years old, forced into hiding for doing his job, living in fear of shadows that might or might not be coming for him. Maybe it was time to stop being the prey and start being the hunter again. Instead of fleeing, he drove to Boston and checked into a hotel under another false name. From there, he began his own investigation into who had found him and left the photograph. He started with Crowley's visitor logs from federal prison. Crowley had received few visitors. His lawyers, a priest, and one recurring name that stood out, Thaddeus Blackstone. The name was familiar, and after some research, Obadiah discovered why. Thaddeus was the son of Harold Blackstone, the deputy director who had died in a suspicious car accident after Draper's murder. Thaddeus Blackstone was now a successful lobbyist in Washington, representing defense contractors and pharmaceutical companies. On paper, he was legitimate, but Obadiah's instincts told him otherwise. This was the connection to Crowley's network, the next generation carrying on the corruption. Obadiah reached out to Rebecca Thornfield, the journalist who had broken the original story. She was still investigating threads from the Crowley case, following money trails that led to increasingly powerful figures. "Thaddeus Blackstone," she said when they met in a Boston cafe. "I've been watching him. For months. He's smart, careful. Nothing directly criminal, but he's connected to 3 senators and at least 5 federal judges. If he's part of this, he's learned from Crowley's mistakes. He's the one who found me," Obadiah said. "I'm sure of it. Then you're in danger. Real danger. These people don't send warnings unless they're ready to follow through. I know. That's why I need your help. We exposed one layer of this corruption, but there are more. Crowley talked about others in positions of power. I think Blackstone is organizing them." Thornfield pulled out a tablet, showing Obadiah her research. "I've identified a pattern. 7 suspicious deaths in the last 2 years, all people who were tangentially connected to investigations into government contract fraud. Made to look like accidents or natural causes, but the timing is too convenient. They're cleaning house," Obadiah realized, "eliminating anyone who might expose them. And you're on that list." They decided to work together, pooling their resources and information. Thornfield had journalistic protection and public visibility that made her a harder target. Obadiah had investigative skills and FBI contacts who still trusted him. Together, they might be able to expose the broader network. Their investigation led them to a disturbing discovery. Prometheus LLC, the company that had been bribing Crowley, hadn't disappeared after his arrest. It had restructured, changed names, and continued operating. Now called Aegis International, it had secured over $2 billion in government contracts in the past 18 months. "Look at the board of directors," Thornfield pointed out. "Half of them have connections to the original conspiracy. They've regrouped, adapted. And Thaddeus Blackstone? He lobbied for every one of their contracts. He's the facilitator, the one who connects the corrupt officials with the corporations willing to pay. They needed proof, something concrete that would stand up in court. Obadiah suggested a risky plan. He would come out of hiding, make himself a target, and see who came after him. With proper surveillance and preparation, they might be able to catch the assassins and trace them back to whoever hired them." "That's suicide," Thornfield protested. "It's the only way," Obadiah countered. "They think I'm just a scared old man hiding in Maine." "Let them come." Against her better judgment, Thornfield agreed to help. They set up surveillance equipment in a rental house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, close enough to Maine that Obadiah's reappearance there would seem natural. Thornfield hired private security, former military operators who specialized in protection and counter-surveillance. Obadiah returned to his Maine town, deliberately showing himself in public, using his real name at the grocery store, mentioning to the chatty librarian that he was a retired FBI agent. Word would spread, and eventually it would reach the right ears. It took 2 weeks. Obadiah was walking his usual morning route along the shore when he noticed them. 2 men who didn't belong, trying too hard to look like tourists. He continued his walk, leading them away from populated areas to a stretch of beach that appeared isolated, but where Thornfield's security team was positioned. The attack came quickly. One man approached from the front, asking for directions, while the other circled behind. They were professionals moving with practiced coordination, but they weren't expecting resistance, and they definitely weren't expecting the 3 former Navy SEALs who emerged from concealed positions. The fight was brief but violent. One attacker was subdued quickly, but the other pulled a gun, firing twice before being tackled. One bullet grazed Obadiah's shoulder. The other hit one of the security operators in the vest. When it was over, both attackers were in custody. The men refused to talk, even when threatened with federal terrorism charges, but their phones provided the breakthrough. Encrypted messages led back to a number registered to a shell company that Thornfield traced to Aegis International. "We've got them," she said. "This is conspiracy to commit murder, traced directly back to the company." But when they tried to involve law enforcement, they hit a wall. The U.S. Attorney's Office declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence. The FBI claimed they couldn't verify the connection between the attackers and Aegis. It was clear that the corruption ran deeper than they'd imagined. That's when Agent Fairbanks contacted them with urgent news. "Obadiah, I've been digging into personnel records. There's something you need to know. Deputy Director Margaret Blackwood, the one who tried to shut down your investigation, she's Harold Blackstone's sister, Thaddeus's aunt. The pieces fell into place. The Blackstone family had been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. Margaret Blackwood had risen through the FBI ranks, protecting the network from within. When Obadiah had gotten too close, she'd tried to stop him. When that failed, she'd helped coordinate the cover-up. We need to go bigger," Thornfield said. "This isn't just about one company or one family. This is about systematic corruption at the highest levels of government." They compiled everything they had: documents, recordings, financial records, and the testimony of one of the captured assassins who finally agreed to cooperate in exchange for protection. But instead of going to law enforcement, they went to Congress, specifically to Senator Elizabeth Craddock, who chaired the Committee on Governmental Affairs and had a reputation for independence. The closed-door hearing was intense. Obadiah testified for 6 hours, laying out the entire conspiracy from Elkanah Draper's murder to the recent attempt on his life. Thornfield provided supporting documentation. The cooperating assassin, testifying via secure video link, confirmed that he'd been hired by Aegis International through Thaddeus Blackstone. Senator Craddock was appalled but cautious. "This committee will need to proceed carefully. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about corruption that reaches into the FBI, the Justice Department, and possibly Congress itself." "That's exactly what we're talking about," Obadiah confirmed. The committee launched a formal investigation, but within days the pushback began. Senator Craddock received death threats. 2 committee members suddenly withdrew, citing personal reasons. Classified documents related to the investigation were leaked to discredit Obadiah and Thornfield. Margaret Blackwood held a press conference, claiming she was the victim of a witch hunt, orchestrated by a disgruntled former agent and a sensationalist journalist. She presented herself as a dedicated public servant being smeared for political reasons. But Obadiah had one more card to play. During his original investigation, he'd found references to recorded conversations between Crowley and his co-conspirators. Crowley had been paranoid enough to secretly record his partners, creating insurance against betrayal. Those recordings had never been found during the official investigation, but Obadiah had a theory about where they might be. He remembered something Crowley had said during his arrest. "The people I work for don't forgive. Not worked for, but work for, present tense. Crowley believed the organization would continue, which meant he might have hidden the recordings somewhere they could be found if something happened to him. Obadiah visited Crowley in federal prison. The former judge had aged dramatically, his once commanding presence reduced to a hollow-eyed shell. But his mind was still sharp, and his hatred for Obadiah remained strong. "You destroyed everything," Crowley said. "I exposed the truth," Obadiah replied. "And now I'm going to finish the job." "Where are the recordings, Crowley?" "What recordings?" "The ones you made of your partners. Your insurance policy. They betrayed you, didn't they? Let you take the fall while they walked free. Help me bring them down." Crowley was silent for a long moment. "Why would I help you?" "Because they abandoned you. Because Margaret Blackwood and Thaddeus Blackstone are living free while you rot in here. Because revenge is the only thing you have left." Something shifted in Crowley's expression. "You know, Agent Sinclair, pride was always my weakness. I thought I was untouchable, that my position and connections would protect me forever. But they threw me away the moment I became a liability. Help me make them pay." Crowley leaned forward. "There's a mausoleum in Congressional Cemetery, my family plot. Behind my father's nameplate, there's a hidden compartment. Everything's there, recordings, documents, account numbers, enough to burn them all. Why didn't you use this before?" "Mutually assured destruction," Crowley said. "If I went down, everyone would go down, but they calculated that I wouldn't use it, that I'd stay quiet to protect what little I had left. They were right, until now." Congressional Cemetery was shrouded in early morning mist when Obadiah arrived with a small FBI forensics team. Senator Craddock had arranged for the legal authority to search the Crowley family mausoleum, though she'd had to call in significant political favors to get it. The official story was that they were investigating potential evidence in an ongoing federal case. The mausoleum was an imposing granite structure, weathered by decades of Washington winters. Crowley's father's nameplate was exactly where the imprisoned judge had described it. When the forensics technician carefully removed it, they found a hidden compartment containing 3 metal boxes, sealed against moisture and time. "Whatever's in there," the technician said, "someone wanted it to last." They opened the boxes back at the FBI field office with Senator Craddock, Rebecca Thornfield, and Agent Fairbanks present via secure video link. What they found exceeded their wildest expectations. The recordings spanned 15 years. Crowley had been paranoid and thorough, recording nearly every significant conversation with his co-conspirators. There were hundreds of hours of audio, meticulously labeled and dated. The documents included bank records, contracts, correspondence, and photographs that documented a web of corruption involving 43 current or former government officials. "Listen to this," Obadiah said, playing one recording dated just 6 months before Elkanah Draper's murder. Margaret Blackwood's voice filled the room. Draper's becoming a problem. He's accessed files he shouldn't have seen. My brother Harold says he's been asking questions at the Baltimore office. Crowley's voice responded, "Can you handle it internally? Not without raising suspicions. It needs to look unconnected to the Bureau. I know someone, expensive but reliable, makes problems disappear. Do it." The Aegis contracts are worth too much to let some accountant destroy everything we've built. Senator Craddock's face was grim. "This is a confession to conspiracy to commit murder." They continued through the recordings. There were conversations about bribing congressmen, blackmailing federal judges, and eliminating witnesses. Thaddeus Blackstone appeared in recordings from the past 5 years, taking over his father's role after Harold's death. coordinating with his Aunt Margaret to protect and expand the network. One recording stood out. A conference call from 3 years ago after Crowley's arrest, Thaddeus Blackstone. Crowley's conviction changes nothing. We adapt, we survive. Margaret Blackwood. I've contained the FBI investigation. They think they've won. Unknown voice. What about Sinclair? Margaret Blackwood. He'll be dealt with when the attention dies down. Patience. Unknown voice. And the recordings Crowley made? Thaddeus Blackstone. He won't use them. Mutual assured destruction. He's smart enough to know that. The unknown voice was identified through audio analysis as Senator James Harrington, the vice chair of the Intelligence Committee and a man being considered for a Supreme Court nomination. We need to move fast, Senator Craddock said. Once they know we have this, they'll mobilize everything to stop us. The next 72 hours were a carefully orchestrated operation. Simultaneous arrests were planned for dawn on a Thursday. FBI tactical teams, carefully vetted to exclude anyone with connections to the conspirators, were positioned outside the homes and offices of 17 individuals. But the night before the arrests, Obadiah received a call from the federal prison where Crowley was held. The former judge had been found dead in his cell, apparent suicide by hanging. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned, and the guards had been conveniently absent during the crucial window. They killed him, Fairbanks said when she heard. They knew he talked. Which means they know we're coming, Obadiah replied. He was right. When the FBI teams moved in at dawn, 3 of the targets had already fled. Margaret Blackwood was gone, her house cleared of anything incriminating. Thaddeus Blackstone had boarded a private jet to a non-extradition country 2 hours before the warrant was issued. Senator Harrington was found dead in his study, an apparent heart attack that the medical examiner would later determine was induced by a drug that mimicked cardiac arrest. But 14 arrests were made, including several high-ranking officials who hadn't had warning. The recordings were made public during a special congressional hearing that was broadcast live on every major network. The public reaction was explosive. Protests erupted outside the FBI headquarters and the Capitol. The president called for a complete investigation and reform of the federal law enforcement system. 3 more senators resigned in disgrace as their connections to the conspiracy were revealed. Rebecca Thornfield's reporting on the scandal earned her a second Pulitzer, but she paid a price for it. Her apartment was burglarized, her car was vandalized, and she received so many death threats that she had to hire full-time security. She eventually moved to Europe, continuing her investigative work from a distance. Agent Fairbanks was promoted and put in charge of a new anti-corruption task force, though she knew that many of her colleagues viewed her with suspicion, either as a hero or a traitor, depending on their own allegiances. Obadiah testified at dozens of hearings and trials over the following year. Each appearance put him at risk, but he felt he owed it to Elkanah Draper and all the other victims to see justice done. The trials resulted in 26 convictions, with sentences ranging from 10 years to life. But the 3 who had escaped, Margaret Blackwood, Thaddeus Blackstone, and 2 others, remained at large. International arrest warrants were issued, but they had vanished completely, likely protected by the wealth they had accumulated through decades of corruption. 1 year after the arrests, Obadiah was finally able to visit Elkanah Draper's grave openly. He placed flowers, the same type that had been in the threatening photograph, and stood in silent tribute to the accountant whose death had started it all. "You got your justice, Elkanah," he said quietly. "Not complete, not perfect, but more than you had before." As he turned to leave, he noticed a woman watching him from a distance. She approached cautiously, and he recognized her from old photographs, Elkanah's sister, now in her 70s. "Agent Sinclair," she said, "I wanted to thank you. For 37 years, I knew my brother didn't kill himself. Everyone said I was in denial, that I couldn't accept the truth. But I knew Elkanah. He would never have given up." "He didn't give up," Obadiah assured her. "He was murdered for trying to do the right thing, and his courage, even in death, helped expose one of the largest corruption networks in American history." "Will they come after you?" she asked. "The ones who got away?" "Probably," Obadiah admitted. "But I'm done hiding. If they want me, they know where to find me." 6 months later, Obadiah was walking his old route along the Maine coast when he noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench ahead. Margaret Blackwood, looking older but still recognizable, dressed in expensive casual clothes that tried too hard to blend in. His hand moved to his concealed weapon, but she held up both hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not here to hurt you, Agent Sinclair," she said. "I'm here to talk." "You're under arrest," Obadiah replied, pulling out his phone to call for backup. "The phone won't work," she said calmly. "I'm using a jamming device. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Against his better judgment, Obadiah sat down on the bench, keeping distance between them, his hand still near his weapon. "You won," Blackwood said. "The network is destroyed. The conspirators are in prison or dead. But you need to understand something. We weren't the disease. We were a symptom. You murdered innocent people." "We maintained order," she countered. "Yes, through corrupt means, but order nonetheless. Do you know what's happening now? The power vacuum we left is being filled by worse actors. Foreign influences, extremist groups, corporations with no allegiance to anything but profit." "That doesn't justify what you did." "No, it doesn't. But I want you to know that it wasn't just about money or power. At least not for all of us. Some of us genuinely believed we were protecting America, even if our methods were wrong. Is that supposed to make me sympathize with you? No. It's supposed to make you understand that the real war isn't over. Thaddeus is building something new, something worse. He's learned from our mistakes. No recordings, no paper trails, no vulnerabilities. He's recruiting a new generation, people with no connection to the old network." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm dying," Blackwood said simply. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I have maybe 2 months. I could disappear, die quietly somewhere, but I wanted someone to know. Someone who might be able to stop what's coming." She stood up, and Obadiah noticed how frail she'd become. "There's a flash drive under the bench. Everything I know about Thaddeus's new operation. Consider it my confession, my attempt at, not redemption, but perhaps mitigation." "You're still under arrest." "No, Agent Sinclair, I'm not. By the time your phone works again, I'll be gone. You'll never find me. But you will find what you need on that drive." She walked away, and true to her word, Obadiah's phone remained dead until she was out of sight. The flash drive was exactly where she'd said it would be. The information on it was extensive and disturbing. Thaddeus Blackstone had indeed created a new network, learning from the old one's mistakes. It operated like a terrorist cell structure, compartmentalized, with no single person knowing the full scope. They were infiltrating government agencies, corporations, and NGOs, playing a long game that might take decades to fully manifest. Obadiah turned the drive over to Senator Craddock and the FBI, triggering a new investigation. But this enemy was smarter, more careful. Progress was slow, victories few and far between. 3 weeks after their encounter, Obadiah read about Margaret Blackwood's death in a Swiss clinic. The obituary listed her as a retired government employee who had died after a brief illness. No mention of her crimes, her role in the conspiracy, or her final confession. Elkanah Draper's case was officially closed. Justice served to the extent possible. But Obadiah knew the truth. The corruption that had killed Draper was like a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more grew back. The only difference now was that people were watching, aware that such corruption could exist. On the anniversary of Draper's death, Obadiah received one final communication, a letter with no return address, postmarked from Guatemala. Agent Sinclair, you think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable. The system you protect is dying, rotting from within. We offered order, control, stability. What comes next will be chaos. But I respect you, in a way. You fought for your principles, misguided as they were. Know that when the collapse comes, when the institutions you trusted fail, we could have prevented it. Enjoy your retirement, you've earned it. But remember, every civilization falls. The only question is who controls the collapse and who builds what comes after. Obadiah burned the letter, but the words stayed with him. He'd solved the case, exposed the conspiracy, brought many to justice. But in quiet moments, usually at 3 a.m. when sleep eluded him, he wondered if Margaret Blackwood and Thaddeus might be right about one thing, that in destroying the old corruption, they'd merely cleared the ground for something worse to grow. The Cold Case Unit received a new mission after the Draper investigation, examining other suspicious deaths from the same era, looking for connections to the network. They found 17 more probable murders, all disguised as suicides or accidents. Each one a person who had tried to expose the truth and paid the ultimate price. Obadiah consulted on these cases from his retirement, becoming the unofficial historian of one of America's darkest chapters. He wrote a book about the investigation, donating all proceeds to a fund for families of corruption victims. The book became required reading at the FBI Academy, a cautionary tale about how power, unchecked, inevitably corrupts. But late at night, when the main fog rolled in and obscured the world beyond his windows, Obadiah would check his locks, test his security system, and keep his weapon close. Because he knew that somewhere out there, Thaddeus Blackstone was building his new empire, and the war against corruption, like Elkanah Draper's quest for justice, would never truly end. The case was closed, but its echoes would reverberate for generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to justice comes from those sworn to protect it, and that one person's courage to speak truth, even in death, can ultimately bring down empires built on lies.